Elfbane, A Tale of the Dwemhar, Stormborn Saga Book 3, written by J.T. Williams, narrated by Nick Denton. Part 1. Wind Temple of Suia. The winds of the north blew against Varen's face. While the others slept beneath deck, he held the wheel of the ship. Evern had told him to keep his current heading. As the moon trekked over and behind them, he expected to see the light of the sun soon. He didn't know how long this journey would take to this temple of the god Dim, but the sea was not going to give them an easy journey. The events from the days before were still fresh in his mind. Evern seemed to know much of the Stormborn, and even Lorlam's past, though Varen had thought they didn't know each other that well. Evern had said that either Lorlam's daughter would come with them, or he would kill her. Varen wondered what would actually transpire once they got to their destination, wherever that was. The morning lights of the twinkling stars, nestled by the purples of the early dawn skies, gave him comfort. He knew the others would be awake before too long, and he was hoping to speak to Adanos. In time, the way below deck opened, and Rotho emerged. He stumbled his way around and looked about, bracing his arms to the cold winds.
Varen, do we keep the eastern track? It feels much colder this way.
The winds have been harsh, but I've kept our path. A moment later, another emerged from below. Rotho took the wheel.
Go, Varen.
It was Adanos. He looked around with a bit of confusion and then spotted Varen running toward him. They embraced.
It worked,
Varen said.
It did,
Adanos confirmed.
Though I spoke with Rotho before I came up. You were taking well to being a captain, traveling to a dwarven fortress, meeting a living shadow elf. I thought they were all dead.
Varen laughed. No, he is very much alive. He has a snake too, Rassi.
A snake?
Adanos gave him a peculiar look.
Well, ships need a crew, and I see you've managed well enough without a very large one.
The ship helps a good deal. On the island we were at before, I found a shipwright of the ancient ships. He was a man who the god of death had forbidden to die. He finally killed himself a few moments prior to when I discovered him in a hidden room. It seems that my mere presence was enough to free him from the bonds prohibiting his death. It was just before discovering his body that I was given these strange mechanical turtles, capable of repairing the ship, and Varen suddenly felt dizzy and stumbled backward. Adanos gripped him.
What is wrong?
I don't know. I feel like my head is leaving me for a moment. The ship tossed from a rogue current and then spun to the side.
Whoa,
Rotho said.
There are no currents like this in the open sea.
Adanos felt his head.
You do not feel as if you are sick.
Varen laid back and began to breathe hard. As he looked up, he saw flashes and felt as if he rode just below the waves. The ship was all around him, and he could feel his chest thumping.
Have you had any rest?
He heard Adanos ask. He shook his head, but couldn't speak.
Stop the ship,
Adanos said.
Aye, Captain.
Rotho dropped the anchors. As the ship slowed to a stop, Varen could feel his breathing getting easier. At this point, Bray, Evern, and Fadis joined them on deck.
What's wrong with him?
Bray asked.
He is too tired, Adanos said. The ship has given him power, but he is still new to it. You shouldn't have pushed him to do what he did. You,
he pointed to Rotho and Bray,
should have stopped him.
Varen shook his head, but Adanos didn't see him. Rotho pointed back at Adanos.
The boy insisted. He was my captain. You were in no place to give any wisdom, and Varen would have had it anyway. I did not know what danger there was to him not sleeping. I thought it was part of the ship.
Adanos randomly let out a scream, and then shook his arm and head.
The effects of the curse, Evern said. You are not well.
I'm fine, he shouted back. He then collapsed, grabbing his head. Bray went to embrace him, and his hand jerked up to stop her.
I'm fine, he said out of breath. I just felt so angry and cold, like before when I was sick. Your soul grew near to the eternal choirs of Vanku, Evern said. Lorlam dragged you back to this life by the powers of Varika's venom. Strange happenings can be expected. however unfortunate they are." Varen began to feel better himself and managed to sit up. Adarnos looked at him and shook his head as he uneasily stood up. "I may have been out of reach while I was unwell, but you must know that if your ship is at dock, you can rest. You may have to force yourself, but no magic can take away the functions of your body. You must give yourself rest in order to survive. At least for now, the binding of yourself with this ship is very new. We will continue on now that you are better, but I bid you at least sit and have some coffee." As Bray made them a few cups of dark coffee, and they went through what little supplies they had for scraps of food, the ship began heading east again. The wind still blew against them, but as the sun began its slowly trek along the horizon, Evan went to the edge of the railings and pointed outward. "We draw near to the temple," he told them. Varen looked out. He could see a strange mountainous island ahead. It had a large wisp of cloud surrounding its peak, and even from a distance, he could make out the sheen stone of a structure that stretched across the island itself. He was curious about this place they were going to, and what further mysteries they would find.
"So, what kind of isle is this, Evan?" Phaedus asked.
"A monastery to the wind god Dim, and a place of peace and meditation that has a ward of magic to protect its inhabitants from darker things." Evan let the last few words trail off.
"I assume this ward was placed by her father?"
Phaedus asked. Evan stared at Phaedus. "In a way, yes. He did send me to acquire what was needed. But do not trouble yourself about the ranger. She is mine to deal with. I am the closest she has to family, and frankly, she doesn't need any distractions, so keep your thoughts to yourself."
"Well, I don't like your assumption, Elf, but I will be sure to mind my words."
Phaedus rolled his eyes in annoyance. The Shadow Elf walked towards the front of the ship, leaving the others near Varen at the helm. "A daughter locked away from the world? I think I've heard this story," Bray said.
"If she's anything like Lolam, she will be in no need of assistance," Roder stated.
"If Evan has threatened to end her life if she does not come with us,
I worry about what exactly she is.
With the poison that the dwarves have, we have to hope that she is willing to help us. From there, we need to figure out what place Adarnos speaks of. He said it was an old place with spirits," Varen said. "Good luck figuring out what our destination is from those hints," Bray said. As they came closer to the island, Varen could see the temple much better now. It was a large tower with pipes near the top of it. They heard a humming sound, especially as they drew closer. There was a dock ahead, and from what they could see, nothing like guards or defenses. "Approach the docks," Evan said. "I depart first, alone. Otherwise you will be picking the ship off the bottom of the ocean floor." Phaedus put an arrow to his string as they approached the docks. As Varen directed the ship into the moorings, Evan jumped to the docks. Roder threw him lines, but the elf ignored them. "Do not tie off in a place you are not sure about. I thought you all were the sailors, dwarf." He stomped away, his staff slightly glowing as Rassi jumped onto the ground before him and slithered ahead. He disappeared beyond a wall. A gust of wind blew upon them. The massive horns of the island sounded, and several tips of the towers began to glow a bright gold. "A temple of Dim?" Bray said. "I know little of the wind god."
"I've never understood the gods," Phaedus stated. "I mean, why must everything have a god? The winds, the mountains, the sea. Can't they just be their own substance without a holy recognition?"
You are but a man, Phaedus. Your substance was made to teach those of the other races, and no more. Do not question the gods or their ways, for they are beyond you. The great poet created us all to feel his word underneath the mother sun. Thoughts like yours led to the great loss of life in the ages before."
"I get your words, Roder, but there was so much loss of life just from these supposed gods. When have they ever actually helped us?"
"The ship," Varen said, "from Medas. That was you," he pointed out. "And Adarnos made his way to your island with a crew, on a ship that went further north than I had ever gone without any gods to help you. Not to mention this ship, something crafted by a lost race. And again, not a god. But it was a god that blessed us with the tools to burn away the fogs, to tell us the path to take to actually reach this ship that was underwater. Mirdas raised it from the sea floor to the surface. And then when Rugard captured us just after, Mirdas sent his creatures to assist us. How else do you explain our escape? A bit of luck and a daring captain. 2 of them, actually. Not to mention a Russis, a dwarf, and a man with a bow. Varen nodded. I would not be a captain without the gods. Phaedus shook his head. Perhaps, but it wasn't the gods who led me here, nor was it the source of the courage you had to turn the ship and save Adonis and Rotho here. The gods care little for us, and any holy types who say otherwise should be drowned. About that time, Evan returned with a man wearing a bright blue robe. Good people, Evan began. We are welcome to come inside and attend to what we need. The man in the blue robe bowed as he reached the edge of the ship. I am Sir Toa, priest of Dim, and wind color of this temple. I welcome you to our remote sanctuary. The wind suddenly gusted and blew through those on the ship. Our gods welcome you as well. As they tied off the ship, Adonis stood, albeit shakily, as Rotho helped him off. Phaedus returned his arrow to his quiver and motioned for Varen to go. As Varen exited the ship, Sir Toa bowed again. Stormborn, I have heard of you in whispers of the wind, and know some of your plights. You are safe here for the time you grace our presence. You will all be as honorary guests. Phaedus nodded with an uncertain glare as Evan shook his head. I doubt it will be deemed honorary by all, Evan said. Take no worry, Sir Toa told him. She has grown stronger and has found peace in your utter abandonment of her. They began to walk, and Sir Toa continued. It has been several years since you were near this place, and in that time she has learned meditation to increase her influence, telepathy, along with spirit convergence, and of course, the elemental magics. As they made their way around the corner, they came to a large silver door with the emblem of a cyclone on it. Sir Toa motioned toward the door, and the winds from above twisted down and the passage opened, revealing a long marble stone corridor with white fire glowing from torches. The walls themselves were inscribed with writings, unlike anything Varen had ever seen. So from your words, she has both of her parents' powers, and a bit more of the Ice Mage's blood, Evan said. It would seem as such is true. Lorlan was a powerful man, and his offspring is something else entirely. Varen noticed that the hallway had several wings that led off to either side. Robed monks stood in the openings, and he had a sudden feeling of slight fear, but also awe. I sense your wondering, Stormborn. Those who inhabit this place have only allegiance to the one called Dim. We see not elf or dwarf or Russis, but only the soul, as it is intended to have balance in the world. They reached another door, and Sir Toa turned to them. You have come at a time of meditation in our great hall. The one you seek, Evan, is one of our leaders in such realms, given her powers. Please do not speak until she is finished. I do believe you will be proud of Avium, daughter of the Ice Mage, Evan. As he pushed open the door, twisting winds glowing in a deep pink in the center of a massive chamber met them. There were many others in robes, just like Sir Toa, sitting cross-legged around an elevated platform. Varen noticed a single figure sitting atop it. As they approached the assembly, Sir Toa motioned for them to sit, as he did the same. The figure sitting on the elevated platform had golden yellow hair that curled slightly in the winds. The figure then reached out with her arms and twisted her wrists. From either side of them, windows opened, and a rush of spectral blue and red magics swarmed in and twisted into the cyclone at the center. The assembly began to hum, and the figures slowly rose from the platform. At first, Varen thought they were standing, but then, as the winds converged around them, he noticed a female now looking out at them. Her eyes glowed white, and her body floated above those who continued their long, bellowing hum. She slowly descended and stood below the platform. The winds began to recede, and she breathed fast. The glow around her faded away, revealing her stark blue eyes. Her blonde hair curled around her as the cyclone that before was pink turned to a whitish hue. She wore white linens curved around metal armor on her shoulders. She pointed toward them, and then abruptly began to walk their way.
My lady, Sotoa said, but she did not look to him nor Vowrin, but to Evan.
Shadow Elf.
Yes, Evium.
Tell me, why do I see you here now, when I have not seen any of my father or you for so many years?
Evan stood and leaned on his staff. I had no contact with your father until recently.
Then you come still and not him. What more must I do to prove my worth to him? I demand him here now.
Mind your words, Evium, Sotoa said. The winds bring much news upon our soul. Your father has deemed it time. I will reveal more of him to you, but he cannot.
What trouble have you two gotten into this time? I remember your stories, your ordeal with the dragon and the crystals. Do adventures keep him away?
Evan looked down for a moment. Evium, your father has fallen. Dwarves with poison attacked his island.
Poison?
She reached out and grasped his head with her hands. Her eyes flashed white for a moment, and he slapped his staff forward with a blast of magic. Watch yourself, he shouted.
I saw what I needed. Poison like you used for the Bob King. So you are the reason.
Sotoa stepped forward. You must find peace and seek wisdom, my...
Now is not the moment for your teachings, Windcaller.
She gripped Evan by the neck and summoned a ball of sparkling light in her hand.
Tell me, Elf, how much were you paid?
He grasped, gripping her hands. Rassi shot out from his robes and wrapped around her neck. She released Evan and began pulling at the snake. Evan brought his staff down and bathed it in orange light. She fell to the ground and struggled, but then relaxed. You killed her, Rotho shouted. No, dear dwarf. She is asleep. He shot a glare at the Windcaller. Sotoa, I am not too impressed that her piece is so violent. This is exactly what Lolam feared. This is why her father trusted you and your kind. She is a moment away from being just as her mother. Several of the monks came and picked up Evium, carrying her to a resting area where they laid her down and covered her. Then they lit incense and began to chant over her. Come, Sotoa said. We will speak further of Evium. He led them down another corridor to a large circular room. It was a tower with windows on the eastern side that looked out toward the horizon. The monks had designated this area for all of them to lay down. Vowrin actually felt very tired, but he, like the others, wondered much of Evium. He returned to the lower level where the monks brought a small meal to them. Fish, Rotho said, and berries. A good meal for many days out at sea, Fidesz said. Not like our lack of supplies has been a primary concern. Evan was the only one not eating. He nibbled a piece of cured meat. Salted pork? Rotho asked. Close, dwarf. I keep a bit on my persons for when I am in a quaint setting. Rotho's eyes became larger than Vowrin had ever seen. You eat my kin in my presence? Within the place of the holy gods? He began to stand, and Fidesz grabbed him. Evan chuckled. No, not really, dwarf. If I'm to eat dwarf, I prefer it fresh. This is a crab-based food, dipped in a weaker poison to up my resistance to certain sea creatures. We all have our dietary needs. He took another bite of his food, and Rotho sat back down. Vowrin looked to Adarnos, who stared at his empty plate. Do you want some food? Adarnos looked up, almost surprised that someone had spoken to him. Do you not hear it? Do you not hear them? The monks? Bray asked. No, the songs. Vowrin stared at him, noticing a fear in his eyes. I have tried to block them out, but I can't. These songs are so loud. You must meditate. I will teach you, Evan said. It is dangerous to drift to death and return. Very dangerous. Adarnos stepped back and nodded to Evan. Vowrin noticed Evan seemed on edge near Adarnos, like he didn't trust the man before him. About that time, Sotoa came back into the room. I trust the food was acceptable. Aye, it was, Rotho said. It is hard to satisfy the dwarven visitors we have, and you are not the only guests we expect. We have visitors from the south coming this way. The winds bring forth many upon the edge of darkness. He returned to Evan. If her father has fallen, as you say, then it is a dark time indeed. He ascended,
as the peoples of old, and combine the magics of his blood to destroy that where he was. I know that when he brought her here as a young child, he warned against her bloodline. Her mother was an angry woman. An evil resided within her like no other, and she was nearly unstoppable. My kin stopped her. You do not openly kill as many as she did within the Shadowlands and simply continue breathing. She wasn't like that before. But of her demon, I cannot speak of. It is said it was a dark presence that took her. Before that, she was what I would call a friend, at least for a time. I do not know what happened, only that she was stopped. The greatest fear I have is that when a demon of that level of power inhabits you, it leaves a part of itself within you that will haunt your children. I fear that power will return to take Avium.
Well, their daughter has many powers. She learned of the Dwemer powers first, and though we tried to conceal them, she was able to manipulate the world around her before her first Rusis spell. She has been taught the way of peace, but her parents' abandonment has helped create a woman that resents the very world meant to protect her. Had she been a baby and never known them, it might have been different. But you do not take a child from what they know and not expect adverse effects. Lolan was not the type to raise a child. Sotoa's demeanor changed, and the wind seemed to shift around him. Then he should have known what the risks would do. She is powerful, unlike any in these realms. She's been taught that at one time her power will be needed for the gods of the north, but her mother's demon will likely return to claim her. She now meditates in the upper sanctum to reclaim her peace. It is likely she will struggle with the truth as long as she remains here. Well, it is time, Sotoa. With the Stormborn in the world and the events of the Barb King, it is time for her to go into the world. It was her father's last wish to assure she was well. I hold no allegiance but to those I call friends, and with these new friends, he motioned to the others, I have discovered that the poison meant to wipe out all who challenge the Barb King is upon the glacial seas. It is no coincidence this boy has claimed his ship. Sotoa suddenly glared at Valrin. Where are you from, Stormborn? I am Valrin of Trava. Valrin, a good name, a strong name. You will need strength to survive these seas. Vals, Adonis said. Valrin was surprised that Adonis remembered. It was a comforting reminder that his friend was still there. Vals or Valrin? Well, both are good. Evan and I have much to speak of for the time, but your crew is welcome here. Night is coming, and I do bid you sleep. The conversation was not a mere coincidence to reach the point where he told him to get sleep. A moment later, Evan and Sotoa stood and departed. Valrin and the others went to their room in the upper level of the tower. He lay down and felt a ripple of energy from his chest go down his back and then, in the strangest of feelings, move away from him. As he closed his eyes, he saw a ship docked outside. He then, for the first time in many, many days, fell asleep. A scream pierced his ears. Valrin found himself standing on a beach. Trees burned around him. Elves grabbed at their throats. He saw his ship torn apart beneath a grand tower that reached up into the heavens. A haze, like smoke, but with flashes of orange magic, surrounded him. Rortho stood next to Bray, who looked up at him. Her skin bubbled from her bones, and he saw death overtake her. He tried to walk, but found himself struggling to free himself from the dead around him. The water behind him turned to ice. He then saw 4 elves appear in the distance. 3 were boys who appeared much older than him, and there was a younger girl. He watched as the haze-like magic covered them, and they collapsed. Then he began to hear a tune in his mind, a song, like an organ he heard on a grand ship that had come to Trava once. Darkness shrouded his sight. He felt his body shaking, and then he saw his ship again docked outside the Wind Temple of Suia. In the distance, with the early morning sun behind him, a ship approached, and he saw dwarves aboard it. Part 1. Wind Temple of Suia. The winds of the north blew against Varen's face. While the others slept beneath deck, he held the wheel of the ship. Evern had told him to keep his current heading. As the moon trekked over and behind them, he expected to see the light of the sun soon. He didn't know how long this journey would take to this temple of the god Dim, but the sea was not going to give them an easy journey. The events from the days before were still fresh in his mind. Evern seemed to know much of the Stormborn and even Lorlam's past, though Varen had thought they didn't know each other that well. Evern had said that either Lorlam's daughter would come with them, or he would kill her. Varen wondered what would actually transpire once they got to their destination, wherever that was. The morning lights of the twinkling stars, nestled by the purples of the early dawn skies, gave him comfort. He knew the others would be awake before too long, and he was hoping to speak to Adanos. In time, the way below deck opened, and Rordo emerged. He stumbled his way around and looked about, bracing his arms to the cold winds.
Varen, do we keep the eastern track? It feels much colder this way.
The winds have been harsh, but I've kept our path. A moment later, another emerged from below. Rordo took the wheel.
Go, Varen.
It was Adanos. He looked around with a bit of confusion and then spotted Varen running toward him. They embraced.
It worked,
Varen said.
It did,
Adanos confirmed.
Though I spoke with Rordo before I came up. You were taking well to being a captain, traveling to a dwarven fortress, meeting a living shadow elf. I thought they were all dead.
Varen laughed.
No, he is very much alive.
He has a snake too. Rassi.
A snake?
Adanos gave him a peculiar look.
Well, ships need a crew, and I see you've managed well enough without a very large one.
The ship helps a good deal. On the island we were at before, I found a shipwright of the ancient ships. He was a man who the god of death had forbidden to die. He finally killed himself a few moments prior to when I discovered him in a hidden room. It seems that my mere presence was enough to free him from the bonds prohibiting his death. It was just before discovering his body that I was given these strange mechanical turtles, capable of repairing the ship, and Varen suddenly felt dizzy and stumbled backward. Adanos gripped him.
What is wrong?
I don't know. I feel like my head is leaving me for a moment. The ship tossed from a rogue current and then spun to the side.
Whoa,
Rordo said.
There are no currents like this in the open sea.
Adanos felt his head.
You do not feel as if you are sick.
Varen laid back and began to breathe hard. As he looked up, he saw flashes and felt as if he rode just below the waves. The ship was all around him, and he could feel his chest thumping.
Have you had any rest?
He heard Adanos ask. He shook his head, but couldn't speak.
Stop the ship,
Adanos said.
Aye, Captain.
Rordo dropped the anchors. As the ship slowed to a stop, Varen could feel his breathing getting easier. At this point, Bray, Evern, and Fadis joined them on deck.
What's wrong with him?
Bray asked.
He is too tired,
Adanos said.
The ship has given him power, but he is still new to it. You shouldn't have pushed him to do what he did. You,
he pointed to Rordo and Bray,
should have stopped him.
Varen shook his head, but Adanos didn't see him. Rordo pointed back at Adanos.
The boy insisted. He was my captain. You were in no place to give any wisdom, and Varen would have had it anyway. I did not know what danger there was to him not sleeping. I thought it was part of the ship.
Adanos randomly let out a scream, and then shook his arm and head.
The effects of the curse, Evern said. You are not well.
I'm fine, he shouted back. He then collapsed, grabbing his head. Bray went to embrace him, and his hand jerked up to stop her.
I'm fine, he said out of breath. I just felt so angry and cold, like before when I was sick. Your soul grew near to the eternal choirs of Vanku, Evern said. Lorlam dragged you back to this life by the powers of Verika's venom. Strange happenings can be expected, however unfortunate they are.
Varen began to feel better himself and managed to sit up. Adanos looked at him and shook his head as he uneasily stood up.
I may have been out of reach while I was unwell, but you must know that if your ship is at dock, you can rest. You may have to force yourself, but no magic can take away the functions of your body. You must give yourself rest in order to survive. At least for now, the binding of yourself with this ship is very new. We will continue on now that you are better, but I bid you at least sit and have some coffee. As Bray made them a few cups of dark coffee, and they went through what little supplies they had for scraps of food, the ship began heading east again. The wind still blew against them, but as the sun began its slowly trek along the horizon, Evan went to the edge of the railings and pointed outward. "We draw near to the temple," he told them. Varen looked out. He could see a strange mountainous island ahead. It had a large wisp of cloud surrounding its peak, and even from a distance, he could make out the sheen stone of a structure that stretched across the island itself. He was curious about this place they were going to, and what further mysteries they would find. "So, what kind of isle is this, Evan?" Phaedus asked. "A monastery to the wind god Dim, and a place of peace and meditation that has a ward of magic to protect its inhabitants from darker things." Evan let the last few words trail off. "I assume this ward was placed by her father?" Phaedus asked. Evan stared at Phaedus. "In a way, yes. He did send me to acquire what was needed. But do not trouble yourself about the ranger. She is mine to deal with. I am the closest she has to family, and frankly, she doesn't need any distractions, so keep your thoughts to yourself." "Well, I don't like your assumption, Elf, but I will be sure to mind my words." Phaedus rolled his eyes in annoyance. The Shadow Elf walked towards the front of the ship, leaving the others near Varen at the helm. "A daughter locked away from the world? I think I've heard this story," Bray said. "If she's anything like Lolam, she will be in no need of assistance," Rhoda stated. "If Evan has threatened to end her life if she does not come with us, I worry about what exactly she is. With the poison that the dwarves have, we have to hope that she is willing to help us. From there, we need to figure out what place the Danos speaks of. He said it was an old place with spirits," Varen said. "Good luck figuring out what our destination is from those hints," Bray said. As they came closer to the island, Varen could see the temple much better now. It was a large tower with pipes near the top of it. They heard a humming sound, especially as they drew closer. There was a dock ahead, and from what they could see, nothing like guards or defenses. "Approach the docks," Evan said. "I depart first, alone. Otherwise you will be picking the ship off the bottom of the ocean floor." Phaedus put an arrow to his string as they approached the docks. As Varen directed the ship into the moorings, Evan jumped to the docks. Rhoda threw him lines, but the elf ignored them. "Do not tie off in a place you are not sure about. I thought you all were the sailors, dwarf." He stomped away, his staff slightly glowing as Rassi jumped onto the ground before him and slithered ahead. He disappeared beyond a wall. A gust of wind blew upon them. The massive horns of the island sounded, and several tips of the towers began to glow a bright gold. "A temple of Dim?" Bray said. "I know little of the wind god." "I've never understood the gods," Phaedus stated. "I mean, why must everything have a god? The winds, the mountains, the sea. Can't they just be their own substance without a holy recognition?" "You are but a man, Phaedus. Your substance was made to teach those of the other races, and no more. Do not question the gods or their ways, for they are beyond you. The great poet created us all to feel his word underneath the mother sun. Thoughts like yours led to the great loss of life in the ages before." "I get your words, Rhoda, but there was so much loss of life just from these supposed gods. When have they ever actually helped us?" "The ship," Varen said, "from Mirdas." "That was you," he pointed out. "And Adonis made his way to your island with a crew, on a ship that went further north than I had ever gone without any gods to help you. Not to mention this ship, something crafted by a lost race, and again, not a god. But it was a god that blessed us with the tools to burn away the fogs, to tell us the path to take to actually reach this ship that was underwater. Mirdas raised it from the sea floor to the surface, and then when Rugog captured us just after, Mirdas sent his creatures to assist us. How else do you explain our escape? A bit of luck and a daring captain. 2 of them, actually.
not to mention a Rooses, a dwarf, and a man with a bow. Varen nodded. I would not be a captain without the gods. Thedas shook his head. Perhaps, but it wasn't the gods who led me here, nor was it the source of the courage you had to turn the ship and save Adonis and Rother here. The gods care little for us, and any holy types who say otherwise should be drowned. About that time, Evan returned with a man wearing a bright blue robe. Good people, Evan began. We are welcome to come inside and attend to what we need. The man in the blue robe bowed as he reached the edge of the ship. I am Sir Toa, priest of Dim, and wind color of this temple. I welcome you to our remote sanctuary. The wind suddenly gusted and blew through those on the ship. Our gods welcome you as well. As they tied off the ship, Adonis stood, albeit shakily, as Rother helped him off. Thedas returned his arrow to his quiver and motioned for Varen to go. As Varen exited the ship, Sir Toa bowed again. Stormborn, I have heard of you in whispers of the wind, and know some of your plights. You are safe here for the time you grace our presence. You will all be as honorary guests. Thedas nodded with an uncertain glare as Evan shook his head. I doubt it will be deemed honorary by all, Evan said. Take no worry, Sir Toa told him. She has grown stronger and has found peace in your utter abandonment of her. They began to walk, and Sir Toa continued. It has been several years since you were near this place, and in that time she has learned meditation to increase her influence, telepathy, along with spirit convergence, and of course, the elemental magics. As they made their way around the corner, they came to a large silver door with the emblem of a cyclone on it. Sir Toa motioned toward the door, and the winds from above twisted down and the passage opened, revealing a long marble stone corridor with white fire glowing from torches. The walls themselves were inscribed with writings, unlike anything Varen had ever seen. So from your words, she has both of her parents' powers, and a bit more of the Ice Mage's blood, Evan said. It would seem as such is true. Lorlan was a powerful man, and his offspring is something else entirely. Varen noticed that the hallway had several wings that led off to either side. Robed monks stood in the openings, and he had a sudden feeling of slight fear, but also awe. I sense you're wondering, Stormborn. Those who inhabit this place have only allegiance to the one called Dim. We see not elf or dwarf or Rooses, but only the soul, as it is intended to have balance in the world. They reached another door, and Sir Toa turned to them. You have come at a time of meditation in our great hall. The one you seek, Evan, is one of our leaders in such realms, given her powers. Please do not speak until she is finished. I do believe you will be proud of Avium, daughter of the Ice Mage, Evan. As he pushed open the door, twisting winds glowing in a deep pink in the center of a massive chamber met them. There were many others in robes, just like Sir Toa, sitting cross-legged around an elevated platform. Varen noticed a single figure sitting atop it. As they approached the assembly, Sir Toa motioned for them to sit, as he did the same. The figure sitting on the elevated platform had golden yellow hair that curled slightly in the winds. The figure then reached out with her arms and twisted her wrists. From either side of them, windows opened, and a rush of spectral blue and red magics swarmed in and twisted into the cyclone at the center. The assembly began to hum, and the figures slowly rose from the platform. At first, Varen thought they were standing, but then, as the winds converged around them, he noticed a female now looking out at them. Her eyes glowed white, and her body floated above those who continued their long, bellowing hum. She slowly descended and stood below the platform. The winds began to recede, and she breathed fast. The glow around her faded away, revealing her stark blue eyes. Her blonde hair curled around her as the cyclone that before was pink turned to a whitish hue. She wore white linens curved around metal armor on her shoulders. She pointed toward them, and then abruptly began to walk their way. My lady, Sir Toa said, but she did not look to him nor Varen, but to Evan. Shadow Elf. Yes, Avium. Tell me, why do I see you here now,
when I have not seen any of my father or you for so many years.
Evan stood and leaned on his staff. I had no contact with your father until recently.
Then you come still and not him. What more must I do to prove my worth to him? I demand him here now.
Mind your words, Avium, Sotoa said. The winds bring much news upon our soul. Your father has deemed it time. I will reveal more of him to you, but he cannot.
What trouble have you two gotten into this time? I remember your stories, your ordeal with the dragon and the crystals. Do adventures keep him away?
Evan looked down for a moment. Avium, your father has fallen. Dwarves with poison attacked his island.
Poison?
She reached out and grasped his head with her hands. Her eyes flashed white for a moment, and he slapped his staff forward with a blast of magic. Watch yourself, he shouted.
I saw what I needed. Poison like you used for the Bob King. So you are the reason.
Sotoa stepped forward. You must find peace and seek wisdom, my...
Now is not the moment for your teachings, Windcaller.
She gripped Evan by the neck and summoned a ball of sparkling light in her hand.
Tell me, Elf, how much were you paid?
He grasped, gripping her hands. Rassi shot out from his robes and wrapped around her neck. She released Evan and began pulling at the snake. Evan brought his staff down and bathed it in orange light. She fell to the ground and struggled, but then relaxed. You killed her, Rotho shouted. No, dear dwarf. She is asleep. He shot a glare at the Windcaller. Sotoa, I am not too impressed that her piece is so violent. This is exactly what Lolam feared. This is why her father trusted you and your kind. She is a moment away from being just as her mother. Several of the monks came and picked up Avium, carrying her to a resting area where they laid her down and covered her. Then they lit incense and began to chant over her. Come, Sotoa said. We will speak further of Avium. He led them down another corridor to a large circular room. It was a tower with windows on the eastern side that looked out toward the horizon. The monks had designated this area for all of them to lay down. Varen actually felt very tired, but he, like the others, wondered much of Avium. He would turn to the lower level where the monks brought a small meal to them. Fish, Rotho said, and berries. A good meal for many days out at sea, Fidus said. Not like our lack of supplies has been a primary concern. Evan was the only one not eating. He nibbled a piece of cured meat. Salted pork? Rotho asked. Close, dwarf. I keep a bit on my persons for when I am in a quaint setting. Rotho's eyes became larger than Varen had ever seen. You eat my kin in my presence? Within the place of the holy gods? He began to stand, and Fidus grabbed him. Evan chuckled. No, not really, dwarf. If I'm to eat dwarf, I prefer it fresh. This is a crab-based food, dipped in a weaker poison to up my resistance to certain sea creatures. We all have our dietary needs. He took another bite of his food, and Rotho sat back down. Varen looked to Adonis, who stared at his empty plate. Do you want some food? Adonis looked up, almost surprised that someone had spoken to him. Do you not hear it? Do you not hear them? The monks? Bray asked. No, the songs. Varen stared at him, noticing a fear in his eyes. I have tried to block them out, but I can't. These songs are so loud. You must meditate. I will teach you, Evan said. It is dangerous to drift to death and return. Very dangerous. Adonis stepped back and nodded to Evan. Varen noticed Evan seemed on edge near Adonis, like he didn't trust the man before him. About that time, Sotoa came back into the room. I trust the food was acceptable. Aye, it was, Rotho said. It is hard to satisfy the dwarven visitors we have, and you are not the only guests we expect. We have visitors from the south coming this way. The winds bring forth many upon the edge of darkness. He returned to Evan. If her father has fallen, as you say, then it is a dark time indeed. He ascended, as the peoples of old, and combined the magics of his blood to destroy that where he was. I know that when he brought her here as a young child, he warned against her bloodline. Her mother was an angry woman,
An evil resided within her like no other, and she was nearly unstoppable. My kin stopped her. You do not openly kill as many as she did within the Shadowlands and simply continue breathing. She wasn't like that before. But of her demon, I cannot speak of. It is said it was a dark presence that took her. Before that, she was what I would call a friend, at least for a time. I do not know what happened, only that she was stopped. The greatest fear I have is that when a demon of that level of power inhabits you, it leaves a part of itself within you that will haunt your children. I fear that power will return to take Avium.
Well, their daughter has many powers.
She learned of the Dwemer powers first, and though we tried to conceal them, she was able to manipulate the world around her before her first Rusis spell. She has been taught the way of peace.
But her parents'
abandonment has helped create a woman that resents the very world meant to protect her. Had she been a baby and never known them, it might have been different. But you do not take a child from what they know and not expect adverse effects. Lolan was not the type to raise a child. Sotoa's demeanor changed, and the wind seemed to shift around him.
Then he should have known what the risks would do.
She is powerful, unlike any in these realms. She's been taught that at one time her power will be needed for the gods of the north, but her mother's demon will likely return to claim her. She now meditates in the upper sanctum to reclaim her peace. It is likely she will struggle with the truth as long as she remains here. Well, it is time, Sotoa. With the Stormborn in the world and the events of the Barb King, it is time for her to go into the world. It was her father's last wish to assure she was well. I hold no allegiance but to those I call friends, and with these new friends, he motioned to the others, I have discovered that the poison meant to wipe out all who challenge the Barb King is upon the glacial seas. It is no coincidence this boy has claimed his ship. Sotoa suddenly glared at Valrin. Where are you from, Stormborn? I am Valrin of Trava. Valrin, a good name, a strong name. You will need strength to survive these seas. Vals, Adonis said. Valrin was surprised that Adonis remembered. It was a comforting reminder that his friend was still there. Vals or Valrin? Well, both are good. Evan and I have much to speak of for the time, but your crew is welcome here. Night is coming, and I do bid you sleep. The conversation was not a mere coincidence to reach the point where he told him to get sleep. A moment later, Evan and Sotoa stood and departed. Valrin and the others went to their room in the upper level of the tower. He lay down and felt a ripple of energy from his chest go down his back and then, in the strangest of feelings, move away from him. As he closed his eyes, he saw a ship docked outside. He then, for the first time in many, many days, fell asleep. A scream pierced his ears. Valrin found himself standing on a beach. Trees burned around him. Elves grabbed at their throats. He saw his ship torn apart beneath a grand tower that reached up into the heavens. A haze, like smoke, but with flashes of orange magic, surrounded him. Rortho stood next to Bray, who looked up at him. Her skin bubbled from her bones, and he saw death overtake her. He tried to walk, but found himself struggling to free himself from the dead around him. The water behind him turned to ice. He then saw 4 elves appear in the distance. 3 were boys who appeared much older than him, and there was a younger girl. He watched as the haze-like magic covered them, and they collapsed. Then he began to hear a tune in his mind, a song like an organ he heard on a grand ship that had come to Trava once. Darkness shrouded his sight. He felt his body shaking, and then he saw his ship again docked outside the Wind Temple of Suia. In the distance, with the early morning sun behind him, a ship approached, and he saw dwarves aboard it.
Part 2. Songs of Harodar.
He opened his eyes and realized he had been dreaming. He'd been sleeping for a good amount of time, but he felt like it had only been a minute.
Everyone slept around him. He sat up, feeling his heart beat in his chest at the thought of the horror he had seen. If this was what sleep would be for him, he didn't want to ever sleep again. He stood up and went to the window, noticing that the morning sky was just beginning to glow from a still sleeping sun. He went downstairs and to the room where they were in before. He saw Evan standing with his hands behind his back, staring out to sea. "Valrin, you stay awake for days upon days, and yet still awaken as I'm sure you did before you knew the name Stormborn." Valrin smiled. "I used to get eels for the fishes in my town. Eels. Good for poisons. They used them for bait." Evan nodded. "A shame to serve such a malign purpose." "Did you go to Lorlam's daughter?" "I did, and she understood much without me speaking. I'm amazed of her powers." "Will she go with us?" "If you mean will I have to kill her? Well, that is still to be decided, but as long as she uses her powers for good, we have nothing to fear. Dwemhar blood is a strange substance. Though they did much good for the world, one who has the taste of darkness can be a force that even the gods can struggle to contend with. You must fear any merging of Dwemhar. Rusis were naturally aggressive, so you can see that the two together, as with her father, it is a very careful balance. When Lorlam and I spoke of our foray, it was a fun time, and there was much we did afterward. He wanted his staff, and well, quite a few creatures placed in our path by the trickster god Wara guarded it. He showed a bit of his shadowy side then, but he could balance out his power, something she must do. If I sense anything but, I will be forced to destroy her." "Can you do it?" Evan looked down at him with a smile, but said nothing. Varro was not sure if this was overconfidence or sureness. He heard someone approaching and turned to see Avium. At first he was alarmed, but she was much calmer now and smiled gently at him. "Valrin," she said. "Avium, please excuse our first meeting and accept this second one." She bowed to him, and he did the same to her. "Everyone tells me that you knew my father and that he sacrificed himself for you." "For all of us. And you. He said so." She looked down for a moment and then nodded. "You are like me, Valrin, without parents, but with a guardian who watched over you for a time. I had Evan, and you had your aunt Tua." Valrin looked at Evan, and then back to Avium. "How'd you know that? Who told you?" Evan grinned. "None. But the vampires have a way of seeking out remedies for their afflictions that do not involve the natural diet they seek. I had heard about you then. I knew the prophecy and of your arrival to Trava, but I also knew it not my place to say of your true purpose, though I know the elf vampire knew of it. Perhaps this can be one of the ways we can trust one another." Avian went to the windows and looked out. "I look forward to our journey, and wherever we plan to go. I still do not understand my purpose, but I am prepared to try." "Then we must prepare," a voice said from out of view. Valrin turned to see Adanos. The once captain of the Truest Bliss approached Evan and offered to shake his hand. Evan did so with a careful glare. "You feel more yourself." "For now, sleep and silence have helped some, but I will still take your offer of meditation, though I've never been a real type for that kind of practice. I know clearly where we must go and how to get there. It is north of here and not too far. A cave of crystals, a place of very old power, masked by magic itself." "Like a ward?" Evan questioned. "No, a place of the actual creation of magic. A place where I believe we will find something locked away for the Stormborn. I know I have struggled since my near death, but there are a few things certain. This is the next path of the Stormborn, and I must kill the one called the Bab King." Valrin and Evan just stared at him. "So you're sure of your path?" Evium asked. "I am. It is what I saw when poisoned, and what I must assure is completed." He looked at Valrin. "Do not fear. I am me. But coming close to death, I realized my path. I am not to claim a realm ship. That was your fate. But I must go after the one who took my chance,
The one who took my version of the necklace you had that your Aunt Tua held for you. Do you know that the king believes himself Stormborn? Varin asked. I do, and I will not allow any chance of him harming another soul, as long as I still breathe. They were all somewhat surprised by Adonis' sureness. I have already woken and told the others. They will join us soon. Soon was an understatement, as immediately Rortho, Bray, and Phaedis came downstairs. Phaedis approached him with a confused expression, and a single eyebrow raised. So you wake us up to begin this quest before the sun comes up, and we find you just now advising the captain, Evern, and the one who tried to kill Evern, of your plan. Avian bowed to them. My apologies for our first meeting. I assure you that my emotions are secured away from that of my actions. Phaedis stared at her. I'm not really sure what that means. It is the way she has been taught, Evern said. Emotion is a great motivator for many. But to let that control you, well, can be quite bad for Shadow Elves or anyone else you might come up against. She is our friend and ally, and we shall see what good Adanos has in store for us in the north. They began to prepare for the journey. As Evern, Adanos, Avium, and Rortho conversed with Sotoa about supplies, Phaedis and Varin exited the Temple of Suia and went towards the ship. The sun was cresting the horizon, and the ship floated against the dock with fresh snow on its railings. How do you like all of this? Varin asked Phaedis. I'm not sure what to say about it, that I can tell you. It is a strange place, these glacier seas. All of my years spent here, and there is still something new to learn of it. I do think about going south again. Soon, maybe. I will think it's time. I don't know. The ranger became quiet, and Varin jumped onto the deck of the ship. He pulled open the way to the inner part of the ship and then looked up. Something was approaching. He could hear the break of water getting closer. Phaedis, too, heard the sound, but a deep fog rolling over the distant waters obscured their view. A horn called. That is a dwarven horn. Phaedis reached for his bow, but did not have it, and Varin's sword was back in the room he had slept in. Varin exited the ship and went to Phaedis, who pulled him back towards the temple. The large ship emerged from the fogs not too far from the docks, and made a hard turn left to avoid striking the dock itself. But this was no dwarven ship. Phaedis had his hand on Varin to push the boy behind him, but now he squinted. That vessel was made by men, the people of Srun, the great island nation to the south. It is what I guess you might call dwarven in build, but not a ship of Rugarg or the Barb King. They had some dealings with those I fought with back in Taria. The ship, about the same size as Varin's, moved up to the dock. Sotoa emerged from the temple and looked at them as he moved towards the new vessel. Do not fear these. They are not as the ones you called the enemy. As they slowly followed behind the Windcaller, Varin saw that dwarves were indeed on the vessel. They wore heavy black armor, and massive hammers inscribed with runes hung on their backs. Hammer songs. I welcome you to the temple of our Lord Dim. I trust your journey was a good one. The dwarves moved out of the way of another dwarf and a man of about the same build and stature as the staunch dwarves. I am a prince of the Alun nation, and have now paid my price to the dwarves of Haradar. I am a shameful man, and attempted to steal from their home city on my visit. I confess my crimes before those who hold me accountable. I hear your crimes, Sotoa said, but I cannot free you of your debt to them, for I do not see it as such. One of the dwarves stepped forward. That man is a foul weakling of his kind, and I do thank you for accepting our request to come here. Dwarves used to make many pilgrimages here. It is long since we had them come this way. I am happy to have some of your people on this island. Though, know we have other guests, some who have dealt with dwarves you come to speak with. The dwarf walked towards Varin, and he couldn't help but be fearful. The man was massive, larger than Rortho, and had notches and scratches in his armor. What is your name, boy? I'm Varin. Norakas, Hammer Song of Haradar. I see fear in your eyes. I'm not the first dwarf you've seen. What have those of the glacier seas done to you? Phaedis stepped between them. Nothing to speak of as of now, Norakas.
I know of the hammer songs. Your zeal is unmatched. Or so the songs say.
Nurakas nodded.
So it is so. But I have no quarrel with those except of my own kind.
Is this your boy?
No, but crewmen of our ship who want to meet you. Know we are not friends to dwarves in this region.
The dwarf shook his head. I fear I may not be either. Those of my orders sent to guard the one called the Bab King have failed to send word of their doings. We are here for many reasons, and we will deal with our kind. Do not get in our way.
Well, Sotoa said, let us go in and you can pay patronage to Dim. He has been without the prayers of the dwarves for some time. They entered the temple, and Varen watched for the others. It was Bray who noticed them first and quickly approached as Evern, Rortho, and Adanos walked out of a storeroom. Rortho dropped his sacks and brought his axe to hand. In a flash, the Hammersongs brandished their weapons. Varen stood right next to Nurakas. The runes of the axe glowed, and there seemed to be a hum in the air from their weapons. Bray had summoned spells of ice, and Evern held out his staff. Nurakas spoke first.
Dwarf, you serve the Bab King of Gurren-Dothrak.
No, I do not.
Hammersong's here.
He lowered his weapon, and the others around the room did too. The monks of the temple and Sotoa seemed surprised, and partially angry to the shows of force happening within their holy halls.
We are Hammersongs directly from Harada. Something is foul within this ocean, and we come to investigate. I am Nurakas, and these Hammersongs are my brothers. If you have no issue with us, then we will not resort to violence unless we are threatened.
They lowered their hammers. Evern clapped. Dwarves, so many dwarves in the icy north. If only I was back home.
You, Nurakas said, you are of the east, of the Shadowlands.
I am of the glacial seas, and I and this crew you see before you make no question of your deeds, as long as you do not question ours. We trade spices, that is all. Varen wondered of the lie Evern had just said. It seemed a good enough excuse.
No questions, but you are the strangest group of traders.
Sotoa coughed as to gain everyone's attention. If you will not be killing one another this wonderful morning, can I, in the breaths of Dim, offer a small meal for you all?
Offer accepted,
one of the Hammersongs said.
Lorks, go get our drinks,
Nurakas said. Their human companion immediately went back toward their ships. Slavery is not something we in the service of Dim appreciate.
Noted as such, Sotoa,
Nurakas said.
There is a place for slavery when debt is owed, but there is a fine line there. To claim a slave, just to do so, or because of their race, is dishonorable to say the least.
Varen and the others worked to finish stocking their ship, with several rations of food and general supplies that they might need, as Sotoa led the dwarves to an actual dining hall. Varen and the others went to join them there before they departed north. In the hall itself was a large table, and the dwarves sat along one whole side. As Varen sat down near the end of the table, Nurakas noted and motioned him over.
This way, young one. I wish to speak to you.
Both Adanos and Rortho followed Varen to sit next to him, as the dwarf waved off the tea offered to him, and instead sipped a large ale that the human had poured for each of the dwarves, from their own personal barrel that no doubt was not the easiest container to get up the long stairwell they had taken from the lower halls. Varen sipped his coffee, and noticed that the dwarves really were nothing like the ones he had met before. Their armour, for one, was not well suited for the works of sailing. It was bulky and cumbersome, but did not seem to inhibit their movement at all.
What are you looking at, girl?
One of them asked Bray. Your armour is a bit cracked. I had always heard that dwarves had the absolute best armour.
We do, he said back in a harsh tone. But dragons have some of the sharpest teeth you might ever be lucky enough to be devoured by. He paused. If you have to absolutely be devoured by such a beast, that is. But that day was not my last. No. And the one that did this now has a permanent place above my family's hall in Harada. Good, Rhoda. There's no need to scare the Rooses, Nurakas said. Forgive Rhoda. Sometimes I think that dragon came a bit too close to roasting him.
Rhoda looked over at Nurakas.
It wasn't like you were much help. There were 8 dragons. I took down 2, including the one headed toward you. You should show a bit more respect, brother. Though it was an obvious tease, Rhoda grumbled to himself. So you head to the city? Rhoda asked. Aye, we need to see what the Bab King is doing. My masters do not trust him. The last time we heard from him, he claimed the sea was his to command. At that time, we thought he was telling a story of old or recounting something in a song. It seemed as such, at least. Now our brothers have ignored our messages. We will figure it out. So you go to the actual city? Adanos asked. Yes. In 2 nights there will be a grand coronation, or so we have discovered, and it is supposed to reveal the greatest discovery in our people's history. Or so our spies have told us. Would you need another to go on your journey? Adonis's question caused every one of Varen's crew to stare at him. We need none, unless you have need to go to the city. Evan grabbed Adonis by the arm. We do not go that way. We told you where we needed to go, and the dwarves are looking for Rodo for stealing that fish. We cannot go there. Aye, I would recommend not returning for some time until we deal with whatever is afoot there. If a dwarf is forced to steal a fish, then there is trouble indeed. We will seek out the truth. Adonis looked to Evan, and then to Bray, as they both rubbed him on his shoulders. You spy on them? Vadis asked to try and get the attention of Adonis. In what ways we can. I do not lie to you here within the holy halls. I fear my brethren have fallen from sanity. There are few of us now, but know that the dwarves of the south will do what is necessary to assure our kin stay within bounds of sanctity. Know these issues are dwarven, and you shouldn't worry of our plight. Us dwarves can handle this issue. There was a silence at the table, and Varen stood up. We should go, he told the others. A boy captain? Nurkas asked. No, he's my first mate, Rhoda said. Come on, crew, to the ship. The others stood up to keep the deceit legitimate. Varen knew they could only trust these dwarves so much. Sotoa joined them. They went downstairs and found Avium, garbed in a dark cloak, standing before the cyclone. She was wearing leather boots and looked nothing like she did before. She turned to them as they approached her. I saw the arrival of the dwarves, their less than happy exchange. I thought it better to remain away from the main conversations. It is good now, Varen said. Are you ready? I have all I need, and I've done away with the robes at the temple. We do not need that kind of attention. They exited the temple, and while the others went to the ship, Evan, Varen, and Avium stood with Sotoa. When you were a child, I never thought the day would come when you would leave our home. I had hoped for a better departure than this, but the others are assuring the dwarves remain where they are. Sotoa looked to Varen. Though I do not condone dishonesty, I am a man of this world who has seen what it is capable of, with or without the gods' desires. Your secrets are safe with us. The dwarves have no view of your departure, and Dim will watch over your journey. Sotoa turned back to Avium. Remember what you've learned here, what has brought you pleasure and happiness, and what happened when darkness attempted to snare you. The power of your ancestors must not be misused. She gripped his hand and bowed, kissing them. I depart as a saint of Dim. I will follow what has been laid before me. I will bring honor to the gods of the north, and not terror. I will protect those covered by the winds, and in time, return to my home in the clouds to be with Dim everlasting. Go, my child. Onto the ship. Avium turned, and Varen noticed that Evan was smiling, something the elf rarely did, except when making a joke or a strange comment, as he was known to do. I will watch over her, Evan told Sotoa. May the winds of Dim guide you all. They bowed and went to the ship, as Sotoa returned to the temple. What happened with Adonis back there? Varen asked. We are fortunate that Vadis came up with something to detract attention from him. That is what happened. As they boarded the ship, Adonis stood at the helm. The others moved the remaining supplies below deck while Varen untied the ship and joined Adonis. As Varen steered the ship from the docks, he activated the sails and they began north. With a gust of wind to speed them forward,
They were on their way. The Wind Temple of Suia passed to their side, and a quick-forming fog veiled the island. Sotoa was true to his word, but this was more for the dwarves, still likely in the dining hall, so they wouldn't catch sight of the ship, than actually hiding the temple. Adonis looked around nervously, and was not at all the confident captain Valrin remembered. "What is on your mind?" Valrin asked. "I can't believe I asked to go with the dwarves. I don't understand why I said that." Valrin gripped the wheel of the ship tighter and tried to figure out the best words to say. Adonis continued. "I feel so drawn to that place. I see myself killing the Bob King. He has caused and will cause so much suffering. I've seen it and cannot explain it." Avium came to the helm and smiled at Valrin. Adonis continued, almost not noticing Avium, and stuttering. "I just keep seeing him. The visions don't leave." "Adonis," Avium said, "I do not know your full story as of right now, but be careful of your visions. It is difficult to discern what is a true vision of the future and what is your own imagination." Adonis nodded as Evan approached them. "Come, Adonis. I will take you below deck, and we will work on meditation. You must learn to quiet your mind, friend." As Adonis went with Evan, Avium shook her head. "Everin said he was cursed with a variation of dwarven poison." "Yes, it is how we met your father, and I am sorry for his death." She looked away and went to the railings of the ship. "I am not. Evan said he ascended, and in his final moments melded his magics together to protect you and his crew, along with destroying the invaders. I take some form of solemn comfort with that. I knew I would leave Suia in time, but I wasn't sure how. Sotoa was good to me my entire life, and so was Evan, but I always prayed that he would be my father to comfort me. I felt like I was trying to be good enough for him, that it was what I was training for. Then I learned of my mother from Evan, and I wondered if he was scared of me." "What did she do exactly?" "Exactly. She slit the throats of 1,000 Shadow Elves' children to prove a point that her race was superior to them and would not fall to their fear. They killed her, paraded her body through the cities in the east, and then desecrated it further by cursing it to walk the realms devoid of life and in constant suffering. That is what Evan said, at least." "Evan has many stories," Valrin said, almost suggesting that what she was told was false. "Most of them are true. He's been around these lands for a very long time, and when it comes to elves, that means something a bit more profound. He is old by their standard." Avium knelt down and noticed the crystals at the helm. "This is a Dwemhar vessel, right?" He wondered of how to answer, but the second he did, she nodded. "You know you do not need to wonder if you can tell me something. The moment it comes to your mind, I can sense it." "So you are like a fortune teller?" She laughed. "I have trained to extend my powers to the point that I am close to the strongest half-blooded Dwemhar in existence. There are no others like me." Bray, who had been standing off to the side and had not gained Valrin's attention, walked up to them. "Wouldn't you only be 1/4 Dwemhar? Your father was half, and your mother was of the race of men." "Fellow Rooses, I guess you would be correct. I meant more that I'm only half of the race of men. But I guess I should be more specific. I'm still learning about my powers," she told both of them. "I work to perfect my elemental magics, but I do believe Bray is ahead of me there. I'm going to do my best to do what is needed. I was always led to this path, but never told what it would hold, and not all future can be foretold." Valrin nodded and moved the switch to activate the map. It came up and Avium pointed to it. "Incredible, and a good example of a future that cannot be foretold. I did not know this ship could do that." "It is a wondrous vessel," Bray said. "I want to tell you that you're new to our crew, but if I can help you with the Rooses side of your magic, let me know. I know a few tricks." As the two of them walked off, Fadis and Raldar joined him. "We were waiting for our turn," Fadis said. "Hey,
Now we have two of those casters, and both of them have tempers like no others, Rother whispered. I don't want to put them in a piss mood. I did that once to a trio of women back in Taria. Not a good idea. I didn't take you for the promiscuous type, dwarf, Fadis teased. Not too promiscuous, but I know my way when it comes to delving. Varin didn't really get the joke, but he could imagine, based off what he had seen some nights back in Trava. Rother stared at the map. So we go north, but nothing else. No landmark or real clue. Adana said before that it was no place of spirits where our fates awaited us. Okay, so no, Fadis confirmed. We will need to wait for him to finish his meditating to have some clue where we're actually going. The captain isn't right, Rother said. I wonder if it was right. Well, helping him to live. We can't decide fate, Fadis said. But it's what we did. I worry he isn't the Adanos I knew. The dwarf's words were less comforting to hear, but Varin knew what he said was right. Adanos had not returned to them as his old self. There were glimpses of it from what little interaction they had, but nothing like before. Nothing like before the curse. Part 3. Ghosts. As was normal in the glacial seas, a storm was moving from the west and crossing their path. Though it was not as turbulent as the one a few days ago, there was a good amount of snow and colder winds. The other crew members bound themselves and stayed huddled around a torch basin that they had obtained back at Suia Temple. Damn cold, Rother said. They call it the glacial seas for a reason, Fadis said. Aye, but holy winds of Dim, does it have to be this cold? Dim does not control the temperature, Evium corrected. Just the winds. Well, perhaps the god can change the direction of them, or keep them away from us for a time. About that time, Adonis emerged from below deck. Complaints about winds on a sailing ship, brother? Well, aye, but I feeling better, Captain. Adonis went to Rother's side and put his hand on the dwarf's shoulder. I told you before that I am not the captain. Valorant is. He has done a fine job on these waters so far. I am just a guide now. So where exactly are we headed? Valorant asked. A place called Arahik, an ancient mine for Dwemhar crystals, and a place I sense will greatly help our cause. How do you know the name? Evan asked. In my dreams I hear the voices of the sea peoples. I receive visions. It is why I know we must go to this place, and why I must eventually face the Bab King. Adonis sat down with the others, and Bray gave him a cup of fresh coffee. No one said a word, and Varin watched as it seemed his crew stared at Adonis, but avoided eye contact. You all fear me, he said. No, Bray stated. We don't, but... You're different, Fadis said. Rother looked up, surprised by the bluntness of his words. Fadis scanned the others and then leaned into Adonis. I'm not afraid to tell you that you are not the man you were before. You no doubt care for your friends, but you are not the captain I met. Everyone else is too kind to flat out say it, but I will. You nearly volunteered yourself to go with the Hammer Songs to Gurren Dothrak. I see, but I understand. I am loyal to all of you, but I am drawn to greater deeds. Evium stood up and went to Adonis. These deeds, she said, putting her hand on his shoulders. And these visions you have, how do you know their source? I sensed them and know it is true. I had a simple dream while I was near death before. I know the path, and I will stay true to it. Evium closed her eyes, and Adonis looked up at her. Varin watched as she seemed to grimace, and her hand on his shoulders began to shake. What? Adonis asked. Evium released her grip on his shoulder. Your mind is hidden. I cannot reach your thoughts. But you are not the Stoneborn. You are not as Valrin. How do you resist? Bray cleared her throat. He was like Valrin, but the Bab King himself stole Adonis' amulet, identical to the one Valrin used to obtain this ship. Adonis cannot claim the title without it. I do not desire to be Stoneborn now. I will help Valrin, yes, but I came back from the beaches and icy plains of Vanku's realm for a purpose. I see my purpose in my mind, and I will complete it. No one else has to see it.
Fedis stood up and went to the railings. Your purpose will require the ship getting very close to the dwarven capital. We cannot risk that.
There will be a way if the gods will it.
Fedis shook his head and leaned back against the railings. Rordo embraced Adanos.
I am happy to have you here, and will do what I can to assist you. I am happy to be here, Rordo. I will control my abruptness. Meditation is the mind's only friend when too many voices cry out, Evan said. Remember this and seek peace.
Avium chuckled.
Your stories run contrary to that, elf.
Evan smiled.
It was your father who taught me these words. I have only listened for a small part of my life.
Varen switched the map crystal and noticed a strange vibration in the image. He looked ahead to see a glow in the darkening sky. Evan noticed it too, and pointed.
We are far north, near the realms of the uncharted seas. Few have gone this way. Well, we have no dwarven ships chasing us, so that is one advantage compared to the last time we went this far north, Rordo said.
As Varen guided the ship towards the glowing lights ahead, an outline of a sheer and slightly sheen structure appeared. As night fell, the water beside them began to glow. Varen looked over the edge and saw sharks of some kind, with glowing runes along their bodies.
Glacial sharks, Rordo said. Very rare in the more southern parts of the sea.
But common here, Fedis pointed out. Varen noticed the sharks appeared not to trail the ship for fun, or to hunt, but as a guide, like smaller vessels assisting a larger one into the harbour. As he turned the ship towards the fast-approaching structure, he jumped as an eruption of sparkling red lights lifted into the skies from the pinnacle of the structure. As they drew closer, Varen noticed land beyond the structure and monolithic stones that seemed to be sending twirling dust that glowed in the dark environment.
Magic, said Avium. I can feel its purity in the air.
I do too, Bray said.
This is a place of its creation. The moon gives charge to the stones, and they, in turn, push magic into the world.
Avium twisted her hand and created a small glowing orb of white. The spell spun and began to glow brightly. Bray did the same with her powers, and Varen witnessed the most massive fireball he had ever seen the Rusis create.
A powerful place, said Evan. We must now figure out why we are actually here.
Adanos looked around, gazing at the magic that floated freely in the air. A drift of it came his way, and he lifted his hands into it, sending a rippling wave of it out.
There is a cave here, somewhere nearby.
Varen steered the ship around the large sheen structure, but saw no obvious doorway. This is nothing but a rock in the sea. There is not a cave, nor doorway.
There is, Adanos said. It is right here.
Varen dropped anchor and walked over to where the others were standing as the ship slowed to a stop.
I saw it in my vision, Adanos said. There is an opening.
As Varen walked near the front of the ship, he felt a surge in his chest. From the post where his amulet was absorbed came a radiant light that shot upon the sheen stone. There was a ripple of blue light, and runes appeared covering the stones. Rordo jumped up and went to the edge.
I know these words. I've seen them in the texts.
To those who come once this place is of ice, know that we remain. We are the last, and we have formed a power to be blessed unto you to use as needed. We are yours. We embrace the old ways, and the Dwemhar way of where we have fallen from. You are the captain, and you shall lead us once again. It was beginning to snow, and the door cracked open as Rordo read the last bit. The entryway was dark, but Varen had no doubt at all of what he should do. Pulling up anchors, he moved the ship into the open doorway. As they entered the passage, torches began to light along the walls, and they found themselves surrounded by both ice and large crystals jutting out from the ceiling like stalactites in a simple cave.
This place, said Adanos. This is the place I saw. I know where we must go. Valoran, move the ship forward and to the right. There is a circular dock for the ship.
Thedas put an arrow to his bowstring and circled around, looking the way they had come. Rortho lifted his axe.
You mustn't fear this place, Adanos said. I have been here in my mind. We are safe.
Avium stood next to Vaurin.
There is old magic here, and there are those who are trapped.
Vaurin jerked to look at her.
It is not those who live, but those who have died who await us.
Evan went to the side of the ship and lifted his staff over the water. An orange glow reflected on the crystalline ceilings and spread across the caves, bathing it in a warm light. As Vaurin moved to the right, following the glowing crystals, he came to a circular stone dock with several torches that burst to life as they approached. Vaurin moved the ship toward it, and just like before at Lorlam's Island, the ship was locked into the dock. It was here he noticed that there were other, smaller ships still at the dock. They were not realm ships, and they had not moved from this spot in some time. Each seemed to be sealed in place. Additional stone constructs seemed to come out of the stonework and secured the ships, lifting them out of the water, a type of dry dock.
This place is of the Sea Peoples? Bray said.
Perhaps another one, like the one that was beneath Lorlam. One of the ones awaiting death, Rortho suggested. I do not know, Vaurin said. Adanos was one of the first off the ship. He moved so quickly that the others struggled to keep up. Bray ran to catch up with him. Vaurin and the others disembarked and looked around.
Keep mindful of your eyes and what your minds conjure, Avium said. A place like this can produce what you see within your mind's eye.
More religious nonsense, Thedas said.
No, Dwemha powers are strong here. I can sense it in the air. There is more than they know of the creation of magic. This place can only open because of the Stoneborn. There is something here, but I sense something else, beyond that.
They hurried to catch up with the others. They ascended a hill that had a domed tower with a single glowing crystal atop it. As they reached the ledge it sat on, they looked down to an expanse of towers and buildings that glowed a distinct bluish color.
A city,
Vaurin said.
A city long sealed, Rortho said, pointing. There are no crystals above this place. The rock appears fused, as if it was molten at some point.
A volcano?
Thedas said. Aye.
Adanos and Bray were some distance ahead, and were waiting for them as they descended.
It is here we find what we need. Vaurin, there is a parchment of sort. An agreement, Adanos said.
An agreement?
I have only seen flashes, but the key to defeating what we face in these seas is here.
They walked towards what remained of a gateway. The columns of stone that once made an archway had melted into one another. The buildings were shifted to one side and fused in a jumble of rubble. They climbed over the gateway, and Vaurin was amazed at the strange twists and turns of the architecture. Brilliantly carved effigies of seated figures with glowing crystals above their heads stared out at them, as if they were actually living.
The image of their gods? Thedas asked.
No, Avium said. Of them. This was one of the cities of Ascension, the last places the Dwemha were before they left our realm.
Rortho stopped and searched an area of the rubble. He moved a few of the stones and found ominous skeletal remains.
Not all were so lucky.
Adanos stopped as they passed a large area of buildings and simply stared upward.
I have read of the Dwemha. Their cities could protect them from enemies, but this one could not sense the coming destruction thrown upon it. It must have been sudden, and when they least expected it.
He looked back to them, and then nodded forward.
There is a passage this way. We are close.
They continued walking. Vaurin looked around, wondering of that day and the surrounding eternal graves. He questioned if they had any clue of their destruction. When they woke up and went to look out at the sea, did they know they would not see another sunrise? Avium touched him on the shoulder.
I feel what you feel. Release it. They no longer suffer as they did that day. This place is not as quiet to those who are sensitive to it. You must feel what I do.
Vaurin became overwhelmed with sadness for a moment, and then it fled him. Avium smiled at him.
Feel what you feel, and then release. You should never hold on to sadness such as this. We enter their resting places, and they make their presence known to you with the essence of their souls. Honor them with a clear mind as we move forward.
The company moved into the passage ahead and found another cavern. This one was open to the tides. Vara could see the night sky through the top of the structure, though it seemed like there was a glass window of some kind preventing the torrential snowfall that blew across the ceiling. Unlike the previous areas, this place was dark. There was a center platform that led up and away from where they stood.
Stormborn, here,
Adonis told him. Valrin went to where he stood and saw a rolled bit of parchment a few steps up. Markings on the ground surrounded it, and there was a large circle with intersecting triangular lines. There were several other markings in some type of runic script, but he didn't recognize it.
This?
Valrin asked.
It is what I saw, and is the key to something that I know is important. Just pick it up.
Valrin gave a nervous look to Bray. Her hands were out, ready to cast her spells at a moment's need. Thaddeus watched behind them, and Evern, Rordo, and Avium stared at him. Their looks of concern didn't help him feel any more confident. He looked back to Adonis and saw that he was shaking and sweating profusely.
Go,
he told Valrin. Valrin stepped forward and grasped the parchment. The markings on the floor turned from black to a glowing red, and for a moment he paused, not moving the parchment. He took a deep breath and pulled it to him. The floor went dark. He exhaled and looked down at the sealed parchment. He broke the seal and rolled it out. It was blank.
I half expected a bit more, Thaddeus said. Adonis, what is this?
The scroll burst into a blue flame, and Valrin struggled to let go as it lifted him up into the air. He could hear Bray shouting, and he looked back to see he was being pulled over the expanse of the water. From beneath him, the water churned and bubbled wildly. He was terrified of what happened, but at the same time he gripped the scroll in fear of plunging into the water below. A glowing tower appeared from the dark depths, and the sounds of horns echoed around him. The walls became alive with movement. Spectral entities floated from the ruins and nooks of the caves. A flow of magical energy came from the caves where they had docked the ship, and spun around him as the top of the tower came to just the level of his feet. The scroll released him. He stood looking out over the water, now glowing with many spectral figures. The scroll moved up to the top of the cave, and its bluish fire glowed brighter for a moment. A crystal, hidden near the glass ceiling, turned golden, and a figure appeared where the scroll was. It spoke with a thunderous voice.
Stormborn of Trava, you come here on the will of all. This place was one of suffering. You were summoned by those who seek passage to ascension after ages of suffering. They are lost souls, spirits of what were. This city was a place of knowledge and peace, but it became a place of war.
The spectral figures below turned to that of glowing ships moving in circular patterns across the water.
The great fleet of Arik was made up of vessels of the clouds, blessed by Dim to take flight in the time before the floods. They were as the realm ships you wield, but with the power of the wind ships of the south, those that have long been lost to the deserts of time. Though those ships needed an infusion of energy and flew with the sounds of songs, these were crewed by those faithful to Dwemhar desires and floated gently on the winds of Dim. They were lost when the Rusis came upon us. They, the enemy of old, brought fire upon us and turned the city to that of what you see now. Countless souls were forced to the thralls of death in the waters below, but by magic, we have remained. We were cursed to remain by it. The imprisoner, the one who comes.
Valrin looked down to the others. A bridge leading to the platform he stood on had appeared, and the others were hurrying toward him, all but Adanos.
You are the Stormborn, the one who will protect the ways of redemption. We are not as the cult that was to be destroyed. Those the waters whisper are now called sea peoples. But your fate is that what we seek to assure is all Dwemhar would desire. From the realm of death, we called out to those who could hear and found one close to our realm. One like you, but who could be used. We wish to serve the Stormborn, but you must defeat it.
Avian was the first to him. She moved her hands in circular motions around him, causing small specks of light to form. Bray was there next with flames to her hands. Adanos is shaking uncontrollably, and we do not know why. Avian said that there is a split in the realms here. Something is coming. Evan brought his staff out, casting a wedge of orange magic.
If something comes from another realm, we must be ready with all the power we have. If Avium is correct in this.
The figure, still high above, spoke again. It was as if the figure was oblivious to Varen's companions.
Death is a path we must all take. But there are those who love its embrace and are empowered by it. When it came to feast on our exposed souls, our defender attempted to stop it. The defender failed.
Beneath them, the image of a massive metal statue appeared, holding its hands out at its side. From its head came a bright flash and a beam of energy. A moment later, an invisible force threw and smashed it. Varen was seeing the past, a vision of what the figure spoke of.
Free us, Stormborn, and forgive us for the betrayal, if you cannot.
The figure vanished. The spectral armada returned to blackness, and the Tower of Gold fell dark.
By the gods, Rother yelled, Adanos has betrayed us.
It wasn't him, Varen said. They called out to him when he was near death.
Then we should never have listened to that bumbling man,
Fadis said. A blast of wind shook the tower, and Evan turned, expanding his ward out. Avium still created specks of light. She began drawing lines out of the air, connecting the hovering spells. I've never seen a ward spell such as that, Bray said.
It isn't a ward, Evan said. It is something else, and you must hurry if this realm is split.
I know, Shadow Elf, Avium said. Her eyes flashed white, and she lifted her hands upward. At that exact moment, a bolt of red lightning appeared beneath them. She brought her hands in with a single clap, and the white lights hovering in the air expanded outwards with a blast of energy spiraling around them. Varen and the others were now splashed in a white hue. The air hummed. Varen drew his blade as the red lightning increased. They began to dance along the outside of Avium's enchantment. Evan had dropped his ward and instead kept his staff above them.
Shroud, strike, shriek. Shroud, strike, shriek. Shroud, strike, shriek.
He continued repeating the phrase, and around them came another wisp of magic.
This saved your father and me, he told Avium, long ago, long before any of you were born.
Evan's spell circled around them and shot out in several directions, bouncing off the walls of the cavern.
All of this, Fadis said, and we still don't know our foe.
Varen wondered of Adanos, what was happening to him. Even from afar, Varen could see that he was still shaking. There was a growl in the air, and the red lightning converged on one spot just beneath them. Their foe emerged, as if climbing through a torn parchment. It was a beast of the ocean with a massive head that looked like a man. From his mouth came flying serpents, and his arms were of green fire.
I devour,
it said. Evan brought his staff in a downward motion, and its spell struck the creature. There was a rumbling clamour, the sound of hissing, and then the creature was upon them. Its legs were not legs at all, but the many tentacles of a squid. It opened its mouth, sending the flying snakes toward them in a battering blast of creatures shredding upon hitting Avium's spell. She brought her hands up and then pushed outward. A shimmering wave of white split across the room, throwing the creature back. In doing so, their protection had failed.
Off the tower, Evan yelled. It is the Titan of the cursed realm.
Rother bowed forward, followed by Bray. Evan remained atop the tower with Avium. Varen ran with the others, with Fadis just behind him. The ranger put an arrow to his cheek and sent a bolt towards the beast. It struck, but the creature just seemed to grin. In a rush, throwing up a wave of water and rubble, it smashed the bridge leading down, Its legs shot up around them, and Varen swung his sword, slicing at one of the legs. Thedas drew back 2 arrows and sent them into the creature's face. They both struck, and it slapped with its hands to remove them. Varen pulled Thedas back, and they ran back for the tower. As the creature went to grab them, a blast of flames from the level below struck the Titan, sending it into a frenzy. It turned and slapped at the buildings where Bray and Rother awaited. The dwarf jumped upon its body and hacked at its form with his axe. The creature stumbled, sliding on the rocks to move back as Bray sent another blast of fire. For a moment, it was aflame. Rother swung repeatedly, sending chunks of shell and rock shattering off the beast. The creature fell downward toward the water, and Rother went with it. In an explosive wave of seawater, he was thrown off the beast and found himself slapping at the surface to keep afloat. Bray ran along the far edge of the room, using a magic to create a path of ice to Rother. Evern and Avium stood back to back, scanning the water. Thedas pointed to an area of water that seemed to be churning more, just as Evern shouted and shot a blast of magic the opposite way. Varen spun and saw the creature's legs surrounding them from all sides and consuming the tower. Avium leapt into the air and lifted her hands up as if she was lifting a heavy weight. Varen felt himself get heavier, and then a sensation rushed through him, and he and the others were propelled upward. He looked down, struggling to keep a grip on his blade as he flew high enough that he could nearly touch the glass ceiling above them. Avium hovered just below all of them, her powers centered on keeping them all above the creature. The creature spun around the room, now completely out of the water. Its tentacled form and muscular human-like body lumbered about, pulling apart the foundations of the cave.
"There is no sending this beast to the realm. We must kill it,"
Evern shouted.
"We have not enchanted weapons to do so,"
Avium shouted.
"but I will try."
Below them, Bray projected a wide ward, shielding her and Rother from the Titan's rampage. Varen was amazed to be floating as he was, and he wondered how much power Avium had to possess to both hold them suspended above the creature and prepare whatever she was.
"By the powers of Arik and in the spirits of my ascendants, I summon what is needed in this hour."
A shimmering, sparkling bolt of white magic appeared in front of her. There was a sudden tune in the air, a growing sound that became louder as Avium brought the bolt just above her head. The Titan seemed to sense its close destruction, as it turned just after this. There was a rumbling growl, and the tentacled form propelled itself upward at a shattering speed, overwhelming Avium. The spell she had summoned fractured and fell apart, and so did her hold on them. They were falling. Thedas screamed behind him as Varen felt a grasp on his chest. He was face to face with Evern, who held a vial of the poison from before, the same poison used to heal Odanos. As the Titan spun above them, set on crushing them with its weight, as they all fell toward the water, the Shadow Elf shattered the vial off Varen's sword. They were still falling. He could see Avium attempting to grasp them, as she herself had managed to regain composure. Varen held out his sword, feeling the colder air of the lower chamber rush over the back of his neck. He closed his eyes as the blackness of the beast was upon him. He thrust his sword up, and a flash of red lightning undulated away from him. He was suddenly jerked to a stop. The creature had expanded its tentacles out and was quivering as an appearance of green spiders burrowed their way into its form, and a nauseating fume erupted from the creature's paws. Varen held his sword with both hands, still dangling above the water, as in a series of explosive flashes, the creature turned white and disintegrated into tiny shells that sprinkled the water below. Varen was falling again, but at the last second, he was caught, not by the grasp of Evern somehow, or the powers of Avium, and there was no splash into the water. He looked to his left and saw the one who had been speaking before, the ghost of the fallen Dwemhar, the one who called this place their grave.
"You have defeated the Devourer of Souls."
The spectral form that caught him had materialized on the deck of a ship. He set Varen down. Avium descended to them with Thedas. Thankfully, Evern had been caught upon another ship nearby. Varen nodded and smiled, seeing he was safe. Looking to where he stood, he could see the water beneath him.
The ship had the look of fog, but those upon its decks seemed as real as anyone else. The man who before had been the voice of the parchment looked no different from any other living form. The ship went to the edge of the water, and Varen stepped off.
Stormborn, you hold a future for all in the worlds, a whisper of a hope to make right what he has doomed to fail. Your ship is one of the last vessels of its kind. Against odds that have grown direr than you yet know, you may have need of those of the royal fleet of Arik. I promise, as the speaker of the Arik, that we will be there to serve the realmship of the Stormborn, if ever he desires us. We are free, due to the actions of the few here.
The man handed a small golden sphere to Varen.
Place this upon your ship, and you need only call out our name, and we will serve you in battle, no matter the odds. This, deemed by the god Wara, is our last step to true salvation within the ocean.
As Varen looked down at the sphere, the light of the spectral fleet faded. He looked up to see that they had vanished, and the cave was again still. Rother and Bray made their way to them in a quick jog, but with the dwarf limping.
"The bastard is dead,"
Rother said.
"A bit of poison worked well," Evan said. "Our captain did what was necessary."
Varen smiled, looking to each of them, but then he thought of Adanos. He looked around. Adanos? The others began to search as well, but he was nowhere to be found. "The creature?" Bray asked. "Did it slap him into the water?" As the others went to the edge and looked in, Avium closed her eyes. It was a mere second before she opened them again. "To the ship, Stormborn. He intends to flee." Fadis was the first to turn and run. Varen was just behind him, but in quick fashion, Evan, Fadis, Varen, and Avium made their way towards the ship. Rother shouted from afar,
"I'll kill him myself if he tried to take our ship without us."
Varen was further confused why his friend would do this. Yes, he had been drawn here by the spirits of the Dwemhar, but that wasn't his fault. Varen sheathed his sword. He had no plans to hurt Adanos. There was no way he could take the ship anyway. As they hurried along the path through the city ruins and began back up the hill leading to the ship, Varen noticed that since the defeat of the Titan and the release of the spirits of the city, there were many more crystals shining around them. It was as if the city itself, in what little power remained within it, had awakened. As they came to the docks, Fadis drew back on his bow, but did not fire. Adanos was nowhere to be seen, and Varen's ship was untouched. Avian walked onto the ship and glanced around. "I saw him upon the sea." Varen walked over to where the smaller ships had been suspended above the water, to find that they were not at all as they were before. The ships had been released, and one of the ships was gone.
"He took a ship,"
Fadis said.
"He seriously took one of these ships and sailed away?"
Evan said nothing. As Bray and Rother made their way to the docks, Varen walked along the docks and rubbed his finger along a stone platform with many glowing runes. Avian walked over to him and pointed. "These were not like this before. Whatever power left within this city has increased. At least enough to deem it to awaken, as if the Dwemhar once again live among it." "Then we must go," Varen said. "He cannot get far without us." They moved towards the ship, and in a very quick motion, Varen guided the ship away from the docks and began toward the opening. It was then the current changed, and the ship would not move. In the water around them, the glacial sharks with their glowing runic bodies began to circle the ship. Something moved in the water beneath them. As the current shifted underneath them, the sharks swam to surround a blackness, emerging from the depths. Part 4. For a Friend.
"Another monster! No more monsters!"
Rother shouted. The water rolled up a massive form, and to Varen's surprise, the god of the seas, Mirdas himself, emerged.
"Stormborn,"
he said. Varen and the others took to their knees. Even Fadis followed suit in slight shock of a massive talking fish.
"Stormborn, you have progressed from our last meeting. Stand, all of you,
They did as Midas said. Darkness gathers upon the vast oceans in a way unexpected by most. The workings of the world have led to these events, and even the flight of the one you all care about is in the order of what is to come.
Adanos, he fled Great Midas. This isn't like him, Varen told him.
The one called Adanos drifted too close to the realm of death. The sorcery used to save him has done little to prevent what damage the poison in his blood and the curse upon it have done to his mind. But he is a vessel for action. He will not stop until he completes his goals.
Is he going to Gurren Dothrak then? Varen asked.
Yes. His ship moves that way with a speed blessed by the gods. He will do what he feels is right, and the gods will watch over you as these events unfold. Adanos follows his fate, and before any type of peace can be had, the danger of the Barb King and what he plans must be washed away. Do it then, God, Thetis said. Why must we mortals do what you could do? Destroy the Barb King if he is such a danger. Midas moved closer to the ship and bumped it.
Do you mind shutting up? Bray shouted. There was a bubbling sound on the side of the ship, and in a splash of ocean spray came a figure in a coat of swimming fish. In its hand was a dagger with a curved blade. The bright blue crystal sent out a radiant light that forced those on the ship to shield their eyes.
Thetis, the figure said, you speak to me as if I am the one who has never taken action against the world. In this form, I have fought upon the lands next to men and elves. I have existed long before this place was an ocean. Back at the creation, back when the great poets sang the songs of creation and spawned me upon the ocean floor. Do not mock what you do not understand.
Midas's demeanor softened, and he turned to Varen.
Go and be watchful. Do what you feel is the best choice and embrace your calling as Stormborn. The Barb King is an evil force that will test you in the end. Know that those of the seas are your friends. You have called to us before, and we are with you.
The figure returned to the water, and a flash vibrated beneath the surface. The god of the seas departed, and they were left alone. Evern and Avium looked to Varen. He stared at them and then looked to the others. Adanos will get himself killed if we do not help him. I see no other path but one that leads us to him. There was no immediate words from anyone in the crew. Varen took that as no one protested his idea. But as he guided the ship away from the cave and emerged outside under a bright moon, he felt worried. He knew he wanted to save Adanos, again. And while the once captain had led them to the place before, and it had worked out, going to the chief city of the dwarves who wanted them all dead, was not perhaps the wisest of decisions. And he knew it. But the threat to those of the glacial seas was a real one. The toxin the dwarves had obtained would destroy too much to be ignored. He brought the map up and noted his target. As he turned the ship a few degrees for the best path south, Rother came to him.
Captain, I do not know what you hope to do by going there. If Adanos goes there, he will have one intent. We are all brave, but I do not believe us strong enough to assail the Barb King.
Varen said nothing. In truth, he wasn't sure what to say.
Varen, I want nothing more than to be able to have our happy crew as it was before. But, and I can't believe I would say this, I do not think Adanos is who he was before.
I know. Rother put his hand on Varen's shoulder.
I am with you, lad. I'll do what we need to do.
The dwarves plan to attack the people of the glacial seas, and from what Rugog said back at Lorlam's Island, it is the elves they target. The Dwarven Lich said that they are the key to some great undoing of what their Barb King seeks. He's been promised armies and claims that he is stronger than even the gods of the north.
His first folly, and not last, I'm sure.
Varen noticed that Bray, Evern, Avium and Thetis had been talking near the front of the ship. They approached in unison, but then simply sat around the helm.
They told me we go to Gurren Dothrak,
Avium said.
I know little of that place, but enough to fear it. I have heard stories of the enchantments in those waters. The reason none have assaulted their place.
Phaedus exhaled. I do not know what we can do to help Adonis at this point. Isn't this place a dwarven fortress, suspended over the ocean? How can we get in? An underwater tunnel? He looked at Evan.
None exist that I know of, Evan said. And if they did, I would not dare jump into those waters so close to the monster that lives in those depths, feeding off dwarven magic.
It's a fortress, but it's also a city, said Rother. There'll be a way in, but it may not be so obvious. If the Hammer Songs from Haradar are going there, I suspect the city will hide any otherwise foul practices that might not line up with the beliefs of the other dwarven kingdoms. Our first problem is this ship. Rother pulled out a small parchment with runic writing on it. Varen tried to look over it as he passed, but couldn't tell anything about it. I wrote down a few of the crystal alignments that allow for the ship to do different things. I can say for one that I have found a type of veiling spell. Not to necessarily make the ship itself invisible, but more to make it look as if every other vessel, even the sails, will change. If I understand the words correctly, he said, turning two of the larger crystals, it might even mean we will once again have ropes hanging above our heads, as it was with the Truest Bliss. Good for us in two ways. One, we will look like other vessels. But two, even with ropes that appear to be needed, the ship will maintain the ability of its advanced construct, although activating any of the weapons would destroy the veil. Once we get closer to the city, I will activate it, but let us try it first. He twisted one of the rare crystals, and the rails of the ship suddenly turned to a weathered age. Ropes flew down from near where the sails connected to the main masts, and slapped down into hooks on the lower levels. From the deck of the ship, pulleys emerged and ropes wrapped around them and shot back up to the top of the ship. The ship slowed and the sails draped down before shimmering and turning a dark blue. The ship had transformed and looked like any other ship on the seas. A clever disguise, Bray said. It is, Phaedus agreed. Rother switched the crystal again, and the ship immediately became what it was before. The ropes, pulleys, and the colours of the sail blew off the ship as if they were only dust. The ship increased speed. I will keep it disengaged for as long as I can. Our speed does suffer when it's in the other form. It seems that everything about the ship changes to be like others, even its sailing speed. Varen took out the orb given to him back at Arik and set it on the deck where he originally set the gold prisms given to him when he first obtained the ship. The orb began to spin and glow gold before a wooden growth emerged from the deck. It was like a small tree that wrapped its branches around the orb. With the orb now entwined in wood, a stone case moved up and around the orb, producing a smaller pillar that further secured it. Rother snickered. I hope I never come up to this part of the ship while a bit sleepy. I just know I'm going to hit my leg on that thing. Sleep? Bray said. Us non-Stormborn should try to get some before we get to Gurren Dothrak. She winked at Varen. Go on, then, Evan told them. Avium and I must meditate on our future works. We shall keep Varen company. The crew didn't protest at all. They all knew that the events to come were a bigger unknown than when they had found the ship they were on. As they watched them descend, Evan and Avium stood on either side of Varen. We have both spoken while the others debated this path. We know it to be the right one, but Avium has seen more, Evan told him. Varen looked at her, and she closed her eyes. She touched his head, and he didn't expect what happened. There was a flash, and he was staring at an open ocean before him. The horizon and a setting sun were in the distance. The sky began to turn dark, and then he saw what appeared as an eye sparkling white. Another flash, and he saw a shoreline and massive trees. He saw hundreds of elves and a haze over the tree line. One by one, the elves fell to the ground, gasping. He then saw a ship speeding away, but it was not him and his crew, but dwarves. Among them was a larger dwarf, but his face was black. As the ship passed away from the island, he saw blood running from the back of the ship, and the sky darkened before stars began to fall from the sky, streaking above him and smashing all over the seas. He could hear a song on the wind, a tune
as if from an organ somewhere from afar. And then the elven land before him vanished, leaving only the floating bodies of thousands of elves. She removed her hand, and his hands were shaking. Was that the future? It was what may come to pass, but I fear I cannot see a clear path for us to follow to avoid it. He attacked the elves, and in some way, this seems to doom the rest of the lands.
Evan looked around them. There is a prophecy in the north. It speaks of a half-elf and the great darkness to come. This half-elf will awaken a horrid evil, and death will fall across the lands. In turn, because of these events, a greater darkness will come. Some have wondered what it means. Some spoke of the Stormborn, and how it was meant to be the half-elf. That clearly is not true. When they speak of the evil, they talk of the Itsu. But that too is something that I do not see as a possibility. They are bound from this realm, at least as I understand it. This dwarf we know as the Barb King uses the title of Stormborn to assert the power. He asserts himself over dwarves and claims that some power in the world will increase his own power if he destroys those who might be of the prophecy to prevent the coming darkness. The death that will come is what we, must prevent. Valorant, I tell you, I may simply eat any dwarf or elf who may find its way to my island. I may come from the elves, known as the most deadly killers in the history of the realms. But seeing the poison of my beloved Varika used in such a way, to see an entire land destroyed, an entire race, and if possible, by the hand of the Barb King. He paused. To see a race of people destroyed by anyone is not something that the Shadow Elf will allow. Varen gripped the wheel and then looked up at the stars. That vision. I can't let that happen.
We will help, Avium said. My father feared me. He feared my powers.
Evan glanced at her and then looked down.
But, she said, I am not my mother. I do not have a bloodlust as she did. I am my father's daughter, strong in my powers and trying to serve the gods of the north. And that I will do. For now that means serving you.
Varen smiled. Then, well, those elves, the ones in the vision, can we help them? Where is that place?
My vision is unclear, Avium said. Your ship is the key, I believe. But why are there dwarves on it?
We can take no risks as we come near Gurren Dothrak. There are barrier islands, and we will hide the ship there. From there we can get in the city, Evan told them. He then tapped his staff on one of the crystals, and the map appeared on the deck of the ship. The seas are vast, and the elven kingdoms border the waters in many places. I know of no island of elves, but I wonder if the vision was meant to have a vague meaning. To mean, perhaps, that from the sea would come something to destroy elves. They were all silent.
I will curve my powers to seek out the truth in my vision. I will say that if Adanos is successful, we may have some better luck, and the elves will be safe without our intervention.
He is foolish, Evan told her. If Adanos has not the sense to take the ship all that way into the Dwarven city, we will be lucky. His newfound encouragement will either propel him to his victory or be his downfall. That was the last they spoke of it before Evan went into the ship to sleep. Avium sat on the deck, meditating, as the stars crossed over the night sky and the winds shifted over Valren. He closed his own eyes, feeling the ship glide across the water, the break of the sea on the bow, and for a moment he felt the sails themselves, as if like wings as he flew across the ocean. He smiled, feeling at one with the ocean. He opened his eyes to the words of Avium.
Starlight high, the night breeze cold, upon the seas above ruins so old, ascended masters speak within, the chosen Stormborn, my captain. I come from man of Roos's blood, of Dwemer magic, of one strong love. My mind sparkles with hellish gleams,
I chant my mantras and slowly sing. Oh, how bright the awakening light, above the stars, above the night. The realm so pure that I call home, the one where my ancestors roam. Avium's song continued through the night. Varen smiled and wondered at her words. He had never heard of something called mantra, and of light above the stars and night. The mystery amazed him, and took his mind off the task ahead. He could see the outline of Gurren Dothrak with a darkening morning sky glowing above him. As much as he wished to help Adanos, he was fearful of what was to come. It was a few hours later. Avium had gone to sleep, and he had spent the time humming to himself as the ship rolled through the waves. He could see approaching lights in the distance. There were large braziers with trails of smoke rising up, and a large lighthouse on the furthest point, reaching out to the sea. Varen moved the crystals to make the ship appear as before. The rope shot out from the masts, and the ship changed form once again. He hoped the disguise would work. Further behind the nearest islands, he could see the massive form of Gurren Dothrak. The dwarven city was wrapped in fog, and as he moved the ship to the right of the lighthouse, he could see that the waters past the islands were much more turbulent. Phaedus and Evan emerged from below, and sleepy-eyed Phaedus leaned over the railings of the ship in an overzealous stretch.
I slept wrong. Oh, my damned back tightened up.
Evan laughed.
You are much too young to complain about such things. Try having a dragon tooth embedded in your spine. I'd rather not. And how would you know how that feels? I wouldn't, but I had an uncle who did. We had to carry him on the back of a unicorn everywhere we went. A most painful situation, I assure you.
Evan pointed to the west. The islands to the far edge. Get away from the first one with the lighthouse. There are rocky coves where we can anchor the ship. The rocky coves were perfect, though partially covered in fog, and not the easiest to traverse. Other ships were already docked here, and each ark acted as its own miniature mooring. As the ship passed under the arch, chains lifted out of the water to help secure the ship. Evan reached up and secured the mooring to the actual deck of the ship. Off one of the rocks was another chain, which Evan pulled, allowing a pathway to drop that would lead them across the water into the island. The others awoke soon afterward. How long has it been since you were here? Varen asked.
A while. If you are worried about them knowing me, do not. They would not expect me dressed as such, and I am sure they think I'm dead.
Are you sure? After the duel with the Lich before?
If I told you how many duels I got in during the old days, you would be surprised I am still alive. I even dueled Dardili the Patid Lolam at one point. It was amazing what some creatures can do to your mind. Thankfully, we didn't kill each other.
I think he meant they will think you're alive considering you fought the Lich, Phaedus said.
I knew what he meant. I just chose to answer as I chose.
Varen shook his head and smiled. Evan said nothing else, and led them from the ship and across the wooden plank walkway that bridged the water to the island. The village ahead bustled with activity, but strangely, there were no dwarves. As they reached the other side, Rordo walked toward one of the small rock houses, and two men sitting by a fire jumped to their feet. We are sorry, Master Dwarf. We will get to smashing the rocks again. Their words caught Rordo by surprise. He looked to the others, and then to the terrified men. Please, Master Dwarf, the man said with his hands shaking above his head. Please do not punish us. The two men both stayed low to the ground and did not dare look up. Rordo shook his head and stomped toward them.
I will tell the Barb King of your folly, unless you tell me exactly what this island here is.
The men looked up, slightly confused, but then returned to staring at the ground. This is where we clean the ships for the slavers. We are the slaves deemed unfit for the city. We find our work honourable and would never complain. Have you come to claim your ship? We know many slavers have brought in extra help for the festivities.
Festivities?
In honour of the Stormborn, the great king, the ruler of the oceans, who will bring glory to all the glacial seas. Rordo looked at them and rolled his eyes.
Get up, you bastards!
He pulled them up one at a time, and they both recoiled away from him.
Get back to work, and let no one know you saw anyone else here. I will take my ship to Gurren Dothrak.
Yes, master, they both said. Rordo motioned for them to follow. What is your plan, dwarf?
Thetis asked. Several ships were moored in docks on the far side of the island. It would be an easy journey to get to the city from here.
His plan is to make us slaves to cover our entrance into the city,
Avium said. Bray shook her head.
That can't be the best idea we can come up with. Would you rather assail him with fireballs flying from our fingertips and risk a fate as Adanos? No, we need to get in quietly, and unless someone has a better idea of how to do so, a way has been revealed.
They walked down the dock and stepped into the low-sitting dwarven ship. Varen noticed stockades and icy chains covered the entire deck.
We'll make that look right,
Rother said. He unhinged several stockades and pointed.
Go there. This will have to look real or it's pointless.
Varen stared for a moment, and Evan pushed him.
Come, boy. Time to do your part in a stockade.
He laid his neck in the cold wooden plank. His neck was small compared to the size of the opening. He put his hands in the appropriate holes, and Rother strung a chain through the stockade. The dwarf paused and looked at Varen's.
Well, I mean, at least you could escape if you really wanted to.
Must be nice, Thetis said as he rattled his own stockade. From where Varen was, he couldn't see Rother after he untied the ship from the moorings. The helm was behind them. They were moving to the city now. The waters were rough, but not as bad as he had expected. As they drew close to one of the several stone pillars surrounding the city, he spotted a massive chain leading into the fog.
This city is old, Evan said. The dwarven magic protecting it is grand in design.
Adanos said it was like Mira. Crystal magic, Varen told him.
Your friend is right. But the construct of a city like this, where most of it sits above the actual ocean, is a rare and magnificent thing. Too bad the dwarves within are as they are. I say that, but know that the average dwarf here is a common dwarf. They live, work, and have their lives here. It would not stop me from breaking one of those chains and bringing ruin to the happy homes. I would have more dwarves to snack on than I could ever need.
Bray sighed.
You don't really eat dwarves, do you?
Of course. I said it before.
But actually eating elves and dwarves? I've never met anyone like that.
There need be only one. And just be happy, I had no desire to slow roast anyone on this ship. Unless this dwarf taking us in causes us too much discomfort.
I'll keep the ruse up, Rother said, as long as I have to. But is there a spot you know, Evan? A place not as guarded? I have not been to this place before.
There is no spot that you speak. This is Gurundorthrak, not Corson or some back island wasteland. The dwarves here are proud. Foolish, but proud.
Varen noticed the fog was clearing. He could see a red gleam above them. As he continued to stare, he could see the crystals protruding from the bottom of the city structure. It was a massive construct. The winds whistling beneath it made a terrifying sound. The ship began to toss in the water, just before Rother made a rough mooring.
"Slaver!"
they heard over the winds. Rother ran to the edge of the ship and threw the tie lines out. Another dwarf came to the edge to help him.
"Where is your crew? That was the worst piloting I've ever seen. You missed the main drop-off point by at least 100 paces. This is way off limits."
"I'm sorry, Harbour Master. My crew was murdered by these fools here. Only sought to bring them in. I normally run spices to the southern lands, so I'm not accustomed to your rules here." The dwarf jumped onto the ship, and Rother's hand went to his axe.
"This is a disgusting lot. An elf, a man, and 2 women. Well, perhaps not so disgusting. The one in the dark robes and with blonde hair will fetch you enough to afford a new crew, no doubt."
"That sounds enticing. I look forward to taking advantage of that." Varen noticed that Bray and Evian became restless, moving in the shackles.
"The rest are a kind of a waste," the dwarf said.
"Oh?" Rother asked.
"Aye, our great king has brought in many from the city to prepare for a visit from Hammersongs from the south. Our dwarven brothers do not condone our vast and profitable slave trades, and, well, frankly, except for the females, we want to assure the presence of men, although less desirable races, is low. Either way, head up the walkway and take them to the pits. From there, we shall to head up to the city and have a fine drink. Stick around for the festivities. There is a great announcement coming." The Bab King is a rare artifact, and I have reason to believe that our city will soon be the greatest in the world.
The dwarf laughed and exited the ship. Rotho, who had not relaxed the entire time, holding his hand on his axe, sighed. He waited a few moments for the dwarves to depart and then released them from the stockade. He bound their hands with cuffs.
I don't see why we must be bound, Avium said.
We have to keep the ruse up, or we risk being seen.
I can get us into the city with my powers.
No, Evan protested. The city cannot be entered by way of magic, or the guardian stones of the dwarves will burn you as they pass them. The city must be entered through the main gates and without magic.
One by one, Rotho strung them together with a chain and led them off the ship. Evan took the chain as they began up the stone steps.
Not too rough, Fede said. It's not like we're actually your prisoners. I fear who watches, he said without looking back. The last thing we want is trouble, and virtually none of us have weapons.
Varen struggled to keep pace, feeling a slight pull on his wrists as he began to jog to keep up with Rotho. They came over the top of the steps, and he saw a massive area full of ships. There were fishing vessels, slaver vessels, and elves and men in cages. Rotho stopped walking as the rest of them filed behind him.
This many, Evan said. I have never seen so many slaves.
They looked to the far left of the rocky port and saw the main gates that led up to a bridgeway that went up into the city.
That is our way in, Evan said, but it looks as if they have changed how one may enter.
They don't want slaves in the city, but they have all of these? Bray asked.
About that time, several dwarfs appeared at their side.
Halt there! Why do you stand and stare? Why are you not moving?
Rotho walked toward them.
My first time in the city, he told them. I was taking in the sights.
Our lord has stated that those who seem suspicious must be questioned.
One of the dwarves grabbed hold of the chain holding Varen and the others.
He also stated that no one save the Bab Guardians shall make transaction with slaves. You are not one of us, so you will go to the city and speak with our consulate to determine if you can be trusted. Once you have approval, you may leave.
The dwarf holding the chain brandished a whip and slapped it at Varen and the others.
You five, don't even flinch. You will learn your place.
Rotho drew his axe, and the other dwarfs did the same, except the one who spoke to him. This one had a hammer with an orange crystal in its head.
Dwarf, I am Hammersong. Do not tempt me to smash you into the lava rock of the city.
Varen and the others were pulled away as this Bab Guardian pushed Rotho in the chest. He worried for his friend, but as they came closer to spiked gates between walls of cages with inebriated slaves all around him, he began to worry about himself a bit more. Part 5. Slavers. The dwarf moved faster than Rotho. They passed through the gate, and Varen tripped on a stone and began to be dragged.
Get up,
Evan shouted. The ground was slick, and he struggled to stand, sliding and stumbling as he tried to get his feet under him. Before he could actually get up, they were pulled into a holding area with several other slaves, who looked much worse than him. Dwarves on elevated platforms looked down into the cell.
Those two,
one of them shouted. He pointed their way. Two of the Bab guards entered, and one grabbed Bray.
This one? Aye, 10,000 gold for the two of them.
The dwarf who had dragged them in immediately nodded his head, and Bray and Avium were struck in the back of the head. The chain holding them was loosened, and they dragged Avium and Bray out of the pits.
Damn fuckers!
Fedis yelled. He pulled himself forward, lunging forward and pulling Evern and Varen. One of the dwarves turned and punched him, dropping the ranger into the mud.
No more,
said Evern.
Just wait.
There were several other transactions after that, and not involving them. What had happened to Bray and Avium did not happen to anyone else, but then again, there were no other females. Varen figured they must have been a special occurrence at the auction. He was very worried, and he had no idea where they were being taken to.
This is a bad idea, Evan said. We should have left the Danos.
Fedis was now attempting to stand back up. We have to get out of here. Immediately, another shout came their way.
I want the man and the boy. Leave the elf. He can remain here.
The dwarves came at them and forced them to the ground.
Do I need to punch you again? He asked Fadis.
Fadis looked down.
Remain quiet, he said to Varen under his breath.
They were moved quickly out of the pits, and Varen got a last look at Evan before they were thrown atop a cart with a donkey tied to it. The dwarf who had bought them quickly approached with the paper in hand.
A happy purchase, he said to the other dwarves.
Varen and Fadis' hands were bound tighter. The dwarf was not dressed as the others. He wore no armour and had a simple garb of a dark tunic. He climbed onto the cart and snapped a whip. They were moving.
What do we do? He asked Fadis.
We stay together and figure a way out.
Bray and Avium awoke in a cold and dark room. Bray could hear music, but could only see a sliver of light ahead of her.
Avium, she said. Yes, I'm here. I don't know where we are. My senses are still coming back. You are trapped, a voice said. You will be used, and then you will die.
Bray noticed her hands were not bound. She created a small ball of flame and revealed the person speaking. It was an elf, but she wasn't alone. There were several others, all females wearing little clothing, with bruises and blood covering their bodies. Beyond them were others, but they were not alive, and in several different stages of decay.
What is this place? Avium asked. We have no place as slaves, but we have a value as entertainment, she said. What is your name? Bray asked. I have no name, she said plainly. You will be the same in time.
Bray looked to one of the others.
What is your name?
But she didn't answer, and instead looked down.
They no longer speak. They will die soon too. They will clear out the pen, and we will be free then.
Bray stood up, as did Avium. They both went to the door. Avium pressed her hands against the wood and closed her eyes.
There are two on the other side, and this door is just mere wood. We will get out of here and to the others.
The no-name elf called over to them.
What are you doing? We are leaving. You can come too. All of you can. No, you cannot. Don't attempt to leave. Some did that. It was angered. Don't anger the monster.
The elf recalled back and moved past the still-living females to the corpses.
Please don't.
Bray and Avium looked at one another, confused.
Here, I will show you there is no monster here.
She made a fireball grow in size, lighting up the cave even brighter. The prisoners pointed and began to move towards the corpses. Bray and Avium looked at where they were pointing and saw a crystalline figure with now glowing red eyes. They both suddenly felt weak and were unable to move. Bray's spell faded, and then the door opened.
I knew one of them had magic, a dwarf said.
Bray could see them looking over her.
Which one?
They rubbed her legs and then grabbed her face.
But she isn't that good. Grab the other one.
Bray looked towards Avium. Avium appeared as if she had consumed too many ales. Bray tried to lift her hands, but could not. They dragged Avium from the room, and the door shut. Varen and Fadis had determined the best course of action currently was to remain silent. They weren't gagged, but when they attempted to speak even a whisper, their dwarven master slapped his whip at them.
You're going to the main kitchen of our king. I need some hands to work in the kitchen. And well, he killed the others I had. We are short on time with a massive feast needing to be prepared. Fish needs cleaning and potatoes from the south are needed to thicken up our stews. I do hope you two can handle that.
Yes, Fadis said. The whip flung back and struck him across the face, leaving a red mark.
No talking, not even when spoken to. Your place is to serve the masters. You shall work until your work is done. Do so in silence. Any word of protest, or that you're sad, or that you feel anything but goodness towards your happy home, especially, and you will be released from your wonderful job with the ease of an axe head.
Fadis grabbed at his face and squinted in pain. Varen rolled over and watched as he ascended a series of roads going higher and higher into the city. He couldn't see very much, but every few moments he could see a glimpse of the sea and thought how right now his only desire was to be upon his ship once again. After some time, They passed through a massive gate and went off to the stone path. He sat up to see they were now going away from the main city. A dark and ominous spire to his left reached high into the sky and glowed with red braziers up and down its entire structure. The ground they travelled across was now black sand, and in a few moments they stopped and were ordered out of the cart. The dwarf cut their bonds.
"You are servants here. You cannot escape. If you try, you will die. There is no question in this matter. You'll be well fed, and in silence you will revere your god king. He is our lord, our storm-born king, a master of the seas. In time, you will understand his powers."
Varin forced himself to remain silent for fear of the whip or worse. Vadis motioned for him to go ahead, as the dwarf walked them toward a small wooden door. They entered a room filled with fragrant herbs and the sounds of bubbling broths. There were several other humans in the kitchen, but all kept their heads down. Massive vats of stew were in the center of the room, and even now there were stacks of bowls being prepared.
"The feast is tonight, if I do not have to remind you, dogs. This will be the greatest service, and there will be a show of excellence by our grand king. Do not speak, or you will be silenced, and I do not want bloodshed on this grand night. You will all soon understand. Be happy you are here and not someplace worse. There are many dark places in Gurren Dothrak."
Time went by slowly. The entire kitchen communicated with hand signals and rhythmic pounds on the table. If someone pointed and struck the table really fast, it meant the action needed to be completed quickly. There was a lot to learn, and it was only made worse by the demanded silence at all times. Varin didn't understand everything, but when he was pushed to a table of potatoes and handed a dull knife, he understood enough. The slaves took Vadis to a different part of the room. They had to clean fish and chickens, but it didn't take too long before he began working on a plan of escape. Varin knew little of rangers, but when he saw Vadis slip the knife into his garments when gathering more fish, he knew something was on his mind. Varin worked tirelessly, cursing himself for ever coming here and hating Adarnos more every second. He shouldn't have tried this. He feared for the others, but especially for Bray. She had been a slave before, and now she was one again. And it was all his fault. The time came when the dwarf from before returned. He had several stacks of clothes and a cart.
"You will clean yourselves and then dress. You will serve us in the grand hall. There, you will stand by at all times for the moment you are needed. Do not fail me in tonight's ordeal, and I may allow you time outside tomorrow. There will be few of us dwarfs here then. Oh, and I know of our king's plan. I have sensed it for some time. You will all see that this is the most wonderful city of the glacial seas, and our god king willing, it will be the last."
The dwarf shut the door, and Vadis stared at him. As the others droned their way to another room, Vadis and he followed. "We will see this Barb King. If Adarnos is here, perhaps we will hear of him. The Barb King sought him out in the past, or so I understand. Surely he will speak of it to show off to his Hammersong guests. What if Nurakas recognizes us? Then we must hope he has seen enough to sour his mind towards these dwarves. Somehow I doubt he will do us any favors. We are not dwarven like him. Dwarves and elves care little of others." A few more moments, and Bray could sit up again. The no-name elf stroked her hair. "You are a young one, but you will not be safe. They will take you too. What are they doing to her?" "Whatever they wish." Bray knew what they meant. It had been the fate of many of her kind in other parts of the world. "That statue," she said, "it only awakens when one of magic uses powers, and then it also comes alive to take those who have rotted too long and created sickness. Be happy in knowing that I have only been here a week, and I will soon depart this life. It will be nice." The elf lay down and did not speak again. Bray began to shake. She had never felt fear like this, and she didn't know what to expect. Evan had been taken to a cave far from the pits. It wasn't a place where others were. It wasn't even worthy of actual guards. They pushed him in, and he found little else other than a muddy mat that was so encrusted he wondered how long it had actually been there. They slammed the gate and left him. He went to look around and saw that he was high above the slave area they were in before. The sun coming through the clouds was choked by smoke from the city. The sky appeared orange, and even the sea in the distance didn't look as it should have. Rassi slithered down his arm.
"We have to get out of this rancid place,"
he told the snake. The snake nodded and slithered up and out of the top.
"This is why I eat these dwarfs. I never cared for the elves as much as the dwarfs. These fat-blooded little armored lads."
"You eat dwarves?" a voice asked.
"I do,"
Evan said, looking around confused.
"I've done that.
Back home?"
"Where is home?"
From the top of the cell fell a gem on a golden necklace. Evan leaned forward and saw an image of a clawed head.
"From the Far East? You are a shadow elf."
"Surprised?" the voice asked as the gem disappeared.
"Yes, I thought you were all gone from these regions. I've been here for many, many years and never saw another."
"Well, I was sent to finish a contract, and it didn't work so well." "Did you lose your assurance of never being captured alive?" "I had not a stomach for death from poison, and I would quite like to avoid it."
Evan smiled. "A shared sentiment. How did you keep such a gem with you?"
"Trading with the ravens that fed on the corpses of other dead here in the Forgotten Areas. Even from here I can talk to those I wish. I'm stuck in the Lost Region."
"Lost Region?"
"This is where the undesirables go to die."
"Seems a bit much when they could just throw us in the maelstrom beneath the city."
There was a laugh from the other elf.
"That is a mirage.
They keep ships there now. They are building a grand fleet. They obtained something unlike other things."
"You talk in riddles."
"You should know better than anyone that this is the way of our kind. My cellmate did not, and he helped me get this nice gem. The ravens love fresh food. I too love food. This gem is tasty." Evan began to hear the elf above chomping down on something, which he presumed was the gem, and wondered if this man was perhaps a bit more eccentric than him. A few moments later, Rassi returned with a key in its mouth.
"Good,"
Evan said, jumping to open the cell door. The key was a perfect fit. He unlocked it and signaled for Rassi to come to him.
"Where did you leave the nasty dwarf?"
The snake seemed to spin in place, almost like it was confused, and then shot up his leg and into his clothing. Evan peered around the rocky edge of his cell to see two dwarves running up the way.
"Come now, Rassi, did you forget to bite them?"
The dwarves pointed.
"That damn snake took the keys. I know it went this way."
Evan looked and noticed it was quite a way down from the level of his cell off the cliff the actual cell sat on. As the dwarves got nearly to the cell, he jumped out, startling one of them, who tripped and rolled off the cliff. The other drew an axe and lunged for him. He jumped up the edge of the cliff and then grabbed hold of the dwarf by his shoulder before drawing his adversary's dagger, kept at his back. He made a thrust into the back of his neck, and the dwarf was silent. He threw the dwarf to join the other one off the cliff. Evan heard clapping above him. "Very good. Near horrible form. Now be a good elf and toss me the key so I may eat some more delightful gems."
"You, my friend, have an issue, and I do believe it would be rather unwise for me to release you."
Evan tossed the keys just out of the other elf's reach.
"From one shadow elf to another. Enjoy the solitude. Perhaps your raven friends will help you."
He turned away and began down as the man repeatedly cursed him. He would go to the city and find the others. He figured the dwarf would be easiest to find, and together they would figure out the next step. Braid closed her eyes for some time. She wasn't sure for how long, but she heard footsteps and quickly sat up. Avian returned, but this time standing. She was forced in and the door slammed behind her.
"You're alive? What did they do to you? Are you hurt?" I have long studied the piggish attributes of the races, she said. Engorged in wine, a dwarf sought me as a plaything. I played him as he wished. That? I don't know what to say. They will not either, when they find him. My powers have returned. I have altered their mind's ability to see as things really are. They see as I wish them to see, but this spell is temporary. They will learn the truth soon, and when they do, we will need to be ready.
Avian put her hands together, and a bright light formed in her fingertips. She drew a circle on the ground, reaching from one side of the cave to the other, and the entire room filled with a bluish glow.
The statue? The one in the corner? If it senses your powers, it will attack again?
Avian stared up at the corner.
Oh, that trinket.
She pointed and sent a blast of white magic toward it. It glowed and then shattered into several pieces. Looking back at her circle, she began to inscribe runes in a language Bray didn't recognize.
When we first came to this place, this strike to my head had disrupted my powers. The only potential issue now is the fact that once my spell is fully charged, it will take some time to engage. While in that state, I will produce a sound that the others will be able to hear, and a light that even through the rocks of this cave they will see. What is this? I will move us from this place back to the ship, the one we were made slaves on. I will need time to recover, but from there, we can find the others and plan our next moves.
The no-name elf and several others slowly crawled to the glowing circle.
Stay back for now. We have to wait until the right moment before you enter. Otherwise, it would tear you apart.
No-name had been reaching out to touch it, but quickly recalled when Avium said that. The many faces of the prisoners showed a new light. Their hope, which before had been as dark as the cave they were lying in, now gave them a renewed vigor.
I can go home,
one of them said.
Yes, in time,
said Bray. The woman smiled.
I don't remember where my home is.
Bray was smiling, but the deterioration of the others weighed heavily on her. The door of the cave suddenly swung open, and without looking up, Avium motioned with her hand, sending the door and the dwarf opening it, flying backward. She then lifted her hands up into the air.
By the light of time, by a splice of form, open.
She brought her hands down, and a bright white light covered the entire circle. As she held her arms together, wind circled around her.
Come, now,
she said. The others began to cautiously crawl towards the light. A growling dwarf brandishing a large mace appeared in the void of the doorway. Bray stood up, bringing her hands together and sending a bolt of electricity directly at him. It bounced through and shot down the hall behind him. There was more shouting, and she could hear the clamour of more of them approaching.
I will need time once they are all within this circle. It will take a few moments. Be ready to jump in.
Okay, Bray said. The dwarves came into her line of sight again, and she sent a line of fire into these. But she didn't stop the flow of flame, and stepped forward, spewing the fiery spell deeper into the doorway. The way was now covered in fire, and at least for the time, impassable. Several women were still making their way to the circle. Bray ran over to them and began to pull them into the enchanted ground. There was one last woman at the very back of the cave, lying on several corpses. Bray wouldn't have seen her had she not been raising her hand. Bray crawled over to her and went to pick her up, when she noticed that her legs had been taken off and her blood-soaked bandages rotted with infection.
Please help me.
Bray lifted her under her arms and began to pull her back toward Avium. Someone shouted, and several throwing axes flew in, striking those within the circle. They began to scream as blood poured out of the cave door. Do it now! Voices shouted from the other side of the flames. The statue is failed. Switch the manual trigger. Drop them!
Bray, the circle now!
Avium shouted. She was a few feet away. A clank reverberated off the cave walls, and it suddenly filled with cold air. A moment later, she looked up to see Avium and the ones within her circle floating in mid-air as she began to fall through a trapdoor of their cavernous prison. She dropped the crippled woman she was holding. Bray looked down and cried in anguish. There was a swirling mass of water beneath her, black and with jagged teeth of crags piercing up out of the water. As the frigid winds rushed around her, she closed her eyes. Avium only had a few seconds. Standing upon the glowing spell still beneath her and the others, she focused her thoughts. Seeing the form of Bray clearly in her mind, she grasped her with her powers and imagined Bray within the circle. When she opened her eyes, the circle was glowing brightly, and Bray was there in shock as she looked at her. Bless the powers of the Dwemer! If only our peoples would not have been such enemies in the ages before. Avium smiled. Hold on. There was a flash, and then Bray opened her eyes to see them on the edge of a rocky hill, away from the slavers' area, and more to the east. This isn't the ship, Bray said. Avium slowly fell to the ground and assumed a meditative position. I must rest, and you must watch for our enemy. I have not the power to go further at this time, but I feel events are coming full circle, and this spot will work for our needs. Be prepared. It had not taken Evan very long to figure out that something was afoot in the city. Several dwarves had been running about since he had found a rocky grotto to ponder his best plan forward. He'd overheard an issue at the brothel. He also noticed they were trying to keep the events quiet and covered up to avoid issues with their king. He wondered of the others, and from the franticness of the conversations he heard, there was a chance his friends had escaped. He didn't know for sure, but he prayed Avium and Varen were well. They were his responsibility, or so he felt. It was now dark, and while he wondered for a while what would be his best path, a wine carrier walked toward one of the barracks and delivered drinks to several dwarves. He saw his chance. As the man came back outside and counted his coins, Rassi slithered out and bit the man on his foot. The man kicked Rassi away and stumbled down the path directly toward him. In a quick motion, he emerged from the shadows, grabbed the man and broke his neck, sending a stream of drool pouring onto his hands. He hated direct contact killing, but he would be hard-pressed to effectively use a poison without any. He undressed the man and took his garbs as his own. Rassi jumped back onto him, and they began toward the city. It was a perfect plan. The dwarves at the gate stopped him, but only to ask for miniature bottles of spirits. Evan wondered of such small bottles. He figured if they were going to drink, they should have larger ones. But then he determined that perhaps the guardians of the city should be drinking, and this was a quick way to hide it. As he slogged his way into the city, the cling of his bottles was rhythmic to him. He smiled and then nodded at the fact that he'd found his friend Rordo sitting on a bench outside a large stone building with the runic writing of consulate in the dwarven language. Will you have a wine with these soon-to-be-dead dwarfs? I tell you, I'd rather like to eat them. Evan, Rordo said. He smiled and then stood up. I am free, but I don't know where the others are. There are other ways into the city, a non-slave way. I am not one for direct attacks, but to get our friends. Our friends are at work. The girls are doing their own rescue. I have heard much rumor of it. We must get to the ship, get our weapons, and head to get Varen. They were taken up to the Hall of the King. We cannot get there. And I is sure of the others. What if they need us? I can sense it, Evan said, closing his eyes for a moment. Avium as well. As for the Hall of the King, there is one way, now that I know that the Maelstrom is not what it seems. It is a mirage, a trick of the eye. There is a way, and we will go that way. First, we go toward our ship, and then we will find our friends. Rordo and Evan made their way back out of the city. There were some peculiar looks at them, but nothing else was said. They proceeded past the slaver area and down to the ship. It seemed the tides were calmer now. They boarded the slaver ship and caught wind leading out. The current seemed to be working with them, at least for the moment. If there is no maelstrom, then these currents are artificial constructs of a dwarven machine, at least to the degree of our rough crossing earlier. Maybe that is not true, but my disdain of the dwarves
due to the manipulation of the natural world, only grows. One should seek oneness with nature, not that which is artificial. Rother sighed. As we go to a ship constructed from that which is artificial, using mechanics above our understanding. That is different, he said. The race that built it was of the oneness of spirit, which is not entirely the same as manipulating mechanical nature. What wood do you know of that can blast fire as the masts of Valorant's ship? None. The ship is not of this world's understanding. They made it back to the island to find the ship untouched. After they docked the one they were on, they sprinted to the realm ship and quickly began, not toward the area of the slavers, but around the island, moving to the east side. It was an area of much more steep cliffs, and not as many dwarven eyes to spot them. The waves of fog like they had seen before began to pour out of the area beneath the city. How do you know that this maelstrom is not real? A crazy shadow elf told me. He looked to see the dwarf's reaction, and Rother's glare of annoyance caused Evan to laugh. Trust me, my people may be a bit crazy at times, but we know much, even if we act as fools. There was a flash above them, and a single flame flew near the ship. Evan looked up, as did Rother. Bray was on the cliffs high above. In a few moments, those that had been rescued by Bray and Avium appeared upon the ship in a glimmer of white light and the slight sounds of melody in the air. Avium collapsed as Evan got to her.
I am weak. I cannot do anything else.
The others around them looked about and were afraid, especially upon seeing Rother. He is our friend, Bray said. These were with you two, Rother asked. Yes. Other women used as the bastards wanted, and then tossed aside. Evan carried Avium below deck, and then returned with his staff. He moved it over the entire group of the once slaves, and they fell asleep. That is what can be done for them for now. I would say it is not a good thing to help so many, but good deeds help balance out the evil thoughts Avium can have. We will deal with these when we can. But for now, we must go into the maelstrom. I fear that all of this will soon be revealed to us. Someone led the Danos to make this move here before. It is time we follow this path to its end. Varen had never seen such a massive hall. It had taken them quite a while to move all of the cooking vats and dinnerware from the lower kitchen to the large assembly room outside the main hall. They had large mechanical carts that made moving the vats of stew upstairs much easier, and now several of them went back and forth, carrying boxes of herbal garnishes, as well as a large cake with many different types of fruit. The dining hall itself was massive. From the side room, the doors opened up to reveal a long hall with seating that ascended along the walls, as if it was a giant amphitheatre, like he had read about in a book on singing a travelling man happened to have back in Trava. Aside from the actual seating set aside from the guests, there was an elevated platform covered with a large sheet directly in front of the king's table, as the passing dwarf called it. Many guards stood around the strangely covered platform, and none were allowed to look under it. The king's table was a long black stone with jagged edges and sapphires atop it. Some of the best golden dishwares were already set and ready for the Barb King's arrival.
All servants, attend to your attire. Be mindful that the time of service is soon.
The guests began to arrive, and the dwarf from before corralled them from behind closed doors to get dressed for the occasion. Varen and Phadis kept their normal clothes on and put the black trousers and shirts over the top of them. It wasn't anything flashy by any means, but it was clean and proper for their roles. The dwarf over the kitchen returned to them.
Service will begin. Ale is first, followed by bread and stew.
He pointed to Varen.
You, young one, will be the cupbearer for our king. He always prefers the youngest of the kitchen to have this honour. Do not spill his ale. The last person who did so did not fare too well when the king became angry. He gets angry a lot because of his power. The fact he must deal with us mortals angers him when we do not live up to his standards.
The dwarf shoved Varen into another room with several large barrels of ale. Phadis looked on from a distance.
Fill the cup up and keep it that way, the dwarf told him. You will hear drums in the hall when the king arrives. Do not make him wait.
The dwarf stormed off, and the others began to file in with trays full of empty glasses. They began to fill the glasses with ale, and Vadis quickly pushed himself to the front of the line. "What is our plan? I assume you have one." Varin nodded. "Adonis must be near if he is alive. Perhaps he will show up tonight at this banquet." "That is suicide. There are more dwarves here than in the whole of the glacial seas." "Then I say our chances are good." Drums began to roll, and there was an audacious cheering in the other room. Varin quickly filled a large glass with ale and walked into the hall. He saw him, the Barb King, lumbering into the room. It was obviously him, considering the man's vast size. He was 3 times as large as any dwarf Varin had yet seen. He wore a crown of silver spikes, and even in a relaxed setting such as this, he was garbed in black armor, decorated with the skulls of what appeared to be some type of aquatic animal with a long horn. A narwhal, perhaps. There were several of them that struck off from his shoulders and arms. Varin understood why he had the name he did. As the Barb King sat upon his table, Varin quickly brought him his ale.
"A new servant for tonight. How wonderful."
He poured the ale into his golden chalice.
"Keep the ale coming, boy. My guests are thirsty."
Varin quickly went back to the storeroom and grabbed several more glasses of ale. By the time he returned to the king's table, he actually recognized some of the king's guests. It was the Hammersongs from back at the Wind Temple of Suia, the ones from Haradar. As he served the ale, he kept his head down and moved quickly. The last thing he needed was to be revealed by Nurakas. The dwarf had been friendly to him before, but he had no guarantees of that here.
"Hear ye! Hear ye!"
An announcer standing near the middle of the seated guests began to shout.
"Thank you for joining us in this magnificent event. We have several surprises for you in attendance. Your financial support of our king's adventures has finally paid off. I am happy to announce that in all our searching, we at last have found what has been sought. But first, dinner!"
There were exuberant yells as the many slave servants came from the back room with several bowls of stew in hand. Vadis moved quicker than the rest, making a point to be among the group serving the bread to the king. They then carried a pot of stew to the table itself. Varin went around to help them with it. One of the slaves moved a switch, and a large fire appeared beneath the actual table of the king. There was a hook to hang the kettle.
"It must stay warm,"
the slave whispered to Varin.
"You, drink, boy," the Barb King shouted. "You are new, so I will give you a pass, but take it as your only one. I need more ale."
There were shouts of agreement from the table, but those on the king's left, the Hammersongs of Haradar, did not share the same sentiment as the others. They actually appeared disgruntled, but Nurakas at least continued to talk with the king. As Varin brought more ale just in time for the main course, Nurakas was pointing across the king and to the Barb Guardian, the Hammersong who had originally captured Varin and the others.
"You are not in line with our order," Nurakas said. "These slaves have no place in a dwarven hall, nor do they have a place as any type of slave master, Nirot."
The one Varin knew as Nirot looked at the king. The king smiled and nodded.
"Nurakas, Nirot keeps to his charge as my protector, but in the glacial seas there is much that the lessers of the world do not know. I will show you what I mean, Hammersong."
The king stood, and the slight roar of the dinner guests quietened almost immediately. He made a motion with his hands, and the dwarf standing near the covered platform turned and grasped the cloth.
"Many of you know the power I have, channeled from the gods themselves to ascend into the powers of the ancient race of the Dwemhar. But there are powers in the world within our reach that are unlike anything I have seen. I am Stormborn, destined to protect the glacial seas, but I cannot do this alone, and I have lost many friends in these attempts."
The king waved his hand, and the platform was unveiled. There were gasps, shouts of horror, and a pungent smell like anything Varin had smelled. On the platform were charred bodies, nearly indistinguishable from one another. Blackened and crusty, the only way Varin could tell what they were was by the bends of their arms and legs frozen in place. Nurakas stood up.
"King, this is an outrage! You bring the dead into this hall. Where are their burial sashes?
They're right, says dwarves.
Varen couldn't tell they were dwarves, but perhaps Nurakas could. The king made another motion toward the far door, and the guards nearest to it opened it. Something approached. It was dark, with trails of purple rolling off it. As it entered the room, there were more gasps, and Varen knew who it was.
I would like to welcome Irakal, my master of magic and necromantic powers, to each of you this evening.
It was the lich from before, the one Evan and Bray had duelled, the one injured by Phadis' arrow. Varen could see no evidence that the creature was harmed in any way. Irakal went before the king and bowed.
I am prepared. Then proceed.
Irakal brought forth his staff, as well as a bag of some kind. His staff began to glow a deep purple colour as he sprinkled a pink glowing dust onto all the charred bodies.
Crushed fairies,
the Barb King told Nurakas. Irakal made several circles around the platform until all the bodies teemed with the glow of the fairy dust. He then lifted his hands with his staff still glowing.
I chase the coldness of Vanku from these bodies, restore them with the power of Fae, and bring life through the gods of the south. Forgotten in time, but embraced by us of the glacial seas. In the power of the Barb King, I trust that he will bring honour to my work.
At the exact time Irakal brought his staff down, the Barb King stood with his arms open, wide above him.
I hear my servants' prayers, and I bestow my powers upon this place.
The entire platform burst forth in a brilliant light. Varen shielded his eyes and then tried to focus again as the light died down. There was an instant chattering amongst the guests. Several dwarves ran with blankets to the actual platform. Varen gasped. Those who were dead before now stood, nude, before the Barb King. Nurakas stood, as did his companions.
You return life to the dead? I did. Had the Lich used his own powers, they would have been resurrected as killing machines, but brainless. By the power I hold now, dear Hammersong, I can assure you that no one will threaten our kingdoms ever again, and I intend to use it to that end.
One of the quivering forms, now garbed, pointed to the king.
My king, you returned me from the plains of icy death. I'd been left on the edge of screaming terror with an organ playing from the ones of Death's Tower.
It was Rugog. Varen glanced over to Phadis, who was actually not paying attention. He was staring up into the upper levels as if watching something.
Rugog, you are one of my proudest captains. The evil done to you was unjust, and you deserve a long life and a death when you are old in years and warmed by a fire. You will not die upon these cold seas. There is a darkness, my brothers and sisters,
he was now shouting.
A darkness approaches our seas that will be brought forth by the elves of a realm that is so protected from us that no mere man can catch it. But I have found something that I will reveal now.
There was a cranking sound, and the floor began to vibrate. Varen noticed the king was low in ale and quickly went to the ale storage to grab more. As he went to go back forth, Phadis grabbed him. There is someone else here. They move in the shadows. What? A Danos, perhaps? No. Something else. Stay here with me. The king cares more of his show than his drink at the moment. Varen stood with Phadis as the king continued.
From the depths of the great seas, locked in Silton Rock, we dwarves work to free this from the grips of time.
A rush of salty air flew in from the opening area of the floor. At first, all Varen could see was a single mast. It was a ship.
Years I have searched for this. I have had the key for so long, I thought it impossible. But now I give you a device of old, a relic of our past, and my own ordained vessel.
Varen could not believe what he saw. It was a realm ship, much like his, but with obvious changes of dwarven design. What in the cursed gods? Phadis said angrily.
With this ship, and a new weapon of magic and poison, I will lead a crusade to decimate all those who stood against us, starting with the elves of the west, a place called Erlas, a land not on any map where, without knowing it, you will just find the sea. I have this ship, and I have this."
The king lifted an amulet into the air. It glowed with a brilliant blue light. "That is Adanos' amulet, the one that he'd been searching for. He said it was taken from him," Varin said. "But how does it glow unless he truly is Stormborn as well? But he has not been in the presence of Mirdas. This is all wrong." "Are you sure?" asked Phaedus. "We know little of the gods. How can we be sure?" The dwarves of the hall were shouting and cheering now.
"We have built our fleet up to be the grandest in 1,000 years. Rugog, my captain, you shall lead the fleet, and I will board my ship. But there is one other thing we must do."
In an abrupt move, the Barb King reached under the table and dragged out a cowering figure bound in chains and bloody. He grabbed the figure by the neck and then stood up on the table, lifting the figure up like some prized game.
"The sacrifice for my ship."
"That is Adanos," Phaedus said. Varin went to run forward, but Phaedus grabbed him. "No! You'll be struck down before you can get to him." The Barb King jumped aboard the vessel, and several other dwarves joined him. Varin now understood why the amulet was glowing. Adanos was near his amulet and an unclaimed realm ship. They chained Adanos to the center mast, and then Nirot lifted a hammer into the air. They forced Adanos' hand against the wood behind them and held the amulet in place.
"My powers beckoned you here, and in your weakness, you are now mine. It is time to merge you with my ship,"
the Barb King said. Nirot swung his hammer, crushing Adanos' hand into the wood with the amulet. The ship began to glow, and more cheering erupted.
"It is done, and we will embark immediately for our glory. Hammer Songs of Haradar, join us!"
Nurakas and the others didn't move. Varin still fought to get away from Phaedus. "We have to help him!" At this moment, figures dropped down from the ceiling, trailed in red flames. There were shouts and then a crackling laugh. "Assassins!" a dwarf yelled. Varin stared in confusion as 4 figures ran along the floor, all moving for the Barb King. His guardians were upon him in a flash, and in quick work, 2 of the assassins were struck down.
"Shadow elves in my holy hall! Kill them all!"
Phaedus pulled Varin into the ale room. "We have to get out now. This is our only chance." Varin shook his head as a figure rushed into the room behind Phaedus. He was tall and wore a suit of dark brown and red leather. He held a jagged blade that was glowing green. "I was told to give you word," the assassin said in a muffled voice. "You know of another Shadow Elf. He was given wisdom of the Maelstrom from our captured master. You should make your way to the lower levels and escape. I will attempt to slay this beast. Stormborn, seek out the Shadow Elves, known as the very gamblers of Eklor in your travels. Know that we have been watching, as the gods would wish us to say. You are not alone." In a flash of flame and magic, the Shadow Elf rushed back into the room and jumped upon the Barb King's guards. Varin and Phaedus carefully made their way out of the room and began to run for the far wall. There was a door ahead. "We go for that," Phaedus shouted. Varin ran just behind the ranger, trying to keep up as he sprinted to the door.
"Slave!"
a voice shouted. It was the kitchen slave master, the one who had taken them before. Phaedus pushed open the door and they entered into the hallway. They looked left and then right. There seemed to be a stairwell leading down. "This way!" Phaedus shouted. As they began to run, they heard the slave master again.
"Come here now!"
he shouted. They turned to see the dwarf approaching with his whip. Phaedus pushed Varin away and ran forward. The man slapped his whip along Phaedus' arm, pulling him to the ground.
"I will stomp the escape right out of you. Our king is in danger, and you flee. You move against us, and you will be taken down. I have been more than clear in our rules."
Phaedus pushed himself up. He grabbed the whip on his arm and pulled forward, throwing the dwarf off balance. A moment later, Phaedus drove the small fillet knife into the dwarf's neck. The dwarf gargled on a stream of blood, and then collapsed. "My work is done." He spat on the dwarf and grabbed Varin. "Let's go!" They were running again. The stairwell took them down into another hallway. As they reached the corridor, another door opened and several armored dwarves stared at them. particularly Phaedus, who was covered in blood.
"Murdering slaves! Get them!"
They were running again, but the next passage down had more dwarves ascending. Bells rang in the distance, and their escape was not getting any easier. They sprinted, moving quicker than their pursuers and reaching another door. They pushed it open and found an exposed balcony. Phaedus ran to it and looked over. "There is a way further down." Varin looked over the edge as the dwarves closed in. They had no time to think. They went over the side, and Phaedus landed first with a roll. Varin was not so graceful and stumbled his landing, collapsing. Phaedus pulled him up. They could see the water below them, but they would need to keep moving down. It appeared that there was a stairwell not too far away that, while open to the shifting winds of the maelstrom beneath, would work for them to keep moving down. "Are you sure you can trust that shadow elf?" Varin asked. "No, but we have little choice at this point. I just hope that maelstrom is not just another trap." They ran into the corridor attached to the hallway and began to run when the doors on either side of the hall opened, revealing two large groups of at least 20 barbed guardians in full armor.
"Caught the murderous ones at last. You two are not normal. You two are not as depressed as the others. Perhaps you are the ones Rugok told us of. The boy captain in his ship."
Phaedus put Varin behind him, but it was no good. The door to the stairwell they needed was beyond them, and behind one of the groups of dwarves. On either side, a slow approaching capture was inevitable. The one speaking removed his helmet. It was the one from before, Nirot.
"Know that the attackers are dead. Your assassins failed. We captured the first one, that Edanos, without so much as a struggle. No, our poison worked just as needed. He was unable to resist the powers of our god. He was drawn, pulled by what he didn't understand, leading him eventually back here. Whatever gods you think are helping you are false beliefs. Edanos was going to be drawn here the entire time, and now he will serve our king in our king's ship. But do not worry. You will not live to see those times."
They were closing in, walking slower than they were before, hoping to turn Phaedus and Varin into squeamish rabbits attempting to escape a trap. There was an end table nearby. Phaedus lifted it and threw it at the dwarves. They stumbled over it and laughed. "You afraid of a fair fight, dwarves?" Phaedus asked.
"It is never fair when a dwarf fights a mere human."
About that time, the door beyond the dwarves blocking their way opened. More dwarves approached. There were around 10 of them, and they too were armored. Except they were not dwarves of Gurren Dothrak.
"What goes on here?"
a familiar voice asked.
"Hammer Song, go back to the hall and await our announcement that the intruders are dealt with. These two work with the assassins. These two slaves threatened our king."
The Hammersong removed his helmet. It was Nurakas.
"That bastard is not my king, nor are any of the poor miscreant excuses of dwarven folly my brother Hammersong's."
The Hammersongs brandished their hammers. The runes upon the hammers' heads brimmed to life with a slight nod. The nearest dwarves to them fled around Phaedus and Varin, joining Nirot and the others.
"This is not fair, for you dwarves to die with such terrible odds as this," Nirot said. "I've nearly 50 of my Hammersongs. You have only 10 of your Haradar rabble."
Nurakas laughed and replaced his helmet.
"You make sense for once, Nirot. Roda," he said with a summoning voice.
"Yes, master," Roda said.
"Stay back. We want a fair fight with these bastards. I don't want anyone claiming that we use too many of our brothers against these fools of the sea."
"Right away, master." Roda motioned for Phaedus and Varin. They ran past Nurakas and the others. Nurakas grabbed Varin.
"Stormborn, I came to determine what my fellow dwarves were doing. Now I am ashamed. I will deal with this rabble, and if I can, I will attempt to help you with the Barb King. He has escaped, and with him went a large fleet of ships. Head below and find a way to get to your ship."
Varin nodded, and Roda opened the door for them to descend down. Roda handed them small axes. "Just in case you need them. Now hurry." They began down the stairwell and ran with the sounds of thunderous clamour behind them. The rocks around them shook with the pounding of the Hammersong's weapons. They continued down and around until they were beneath the city itself and entered into a layer of fog. "Keep your hands on the wall so you do not fall," Thetis said. Varin struggled to keep up and not trip as they journeyed down. Eventually, they were well below the fog and they could see the sea beneath them. The maelstrom was no mere maelstrom, but a toothed beast with its mouth ajar and seemingly sleeping beneath it. A path led to the water's edge. They made their way as quickly as they could and noticed that a massive fleet was pulling out at the far side of the harbour. There were hundreds of vessels, and to Varin's terror, one realm ship. "What do we do?" Varin asked. Thetis looked around and scanned the ocean around them. Varin walked to the opposite edge, and then looked back up the way they had come. The fight still continued, not that he could actually hear it, but the rocks of the corridor were beginning to crack from the battle itself. "The Hammersongs," he said to Thetis. Thetis smiled. "I would hate to piss them off." As the last of the ships departed the harbour, Varin suddenly spotted glowing glacial sharks at the edge of the platform. Then, his realm ship, with all of the crew he had come with. "Come now," Evan shouted. As the ship slowed, Thetis and Varin jumped on. "Follow them," Varin said. Rother turned the wheel, and the ship lurched forward. As they passed around the edge of the sleeping beast, Varin looked into its gaping maw, just above the surface of the water. "Be happy we don't have to deal with that," Bray said. He embraced her. "I can't believe we escaped that." She smiled. "I'm happy we did. All of us." Varin noticed the many sickly-looking elves and females of his own race. "Slaves? Worse, I think." Avian bowed to him. "Stormborn, a path would take us west. I have seen." "We must go to a hidden place, another realm, a place called Erlas." "That is why he needed this ship," Evan said. "He sought passage into a protected realm." "So Adanos, is he dead?" Rother asked. "He is captured. His hand and his amulet were smashed into the ship. The Lich and Rugog are with the Barb King." "Rugog was dead," Rother said. "No one could have survived that explosion." "He was resurrected," Thetis confirmed. "I would not believe it if I had not seen it." They moved away from beneath the city and came to a series of barrier islands on the west side. "We cannot take these ill women into battle," Evan said. As they came along the shores, Evan went to the railings as several men and women looked on from the shore. "Your slavers have departed. We recommend you all to do the same. Come, take these we have aboard this ship, and take whatever vessels you can and head south. This may be your only time to escape this place." The slaves seemed reluctant at first, but one by one they came aboard the ship, and the sleeping slaves were removed. As the last of them were taken off the ship, they began away from the shore with haste. Bray was staring at the island as they pulled away. "A better fate than going with us," Evan told her. The ship pulled away from the horror that was Gurren Dothrak, for good, and they soon gained on the fleet itself. "How did you escape, Valrin?" Evan asked. "Shadow Elves attacked the king, giving us enough distraction." "Who contacted them? I thought the one I had met was a rogue like myself." "I don't know," Valrin said, shaking his head. "But they said to seek out the Veric gamblers of Eklo at some point." "Those bastards?" "Well, that is an adventure for another day, Captain." Evan smiled. "If this Barb King goes to Erlas, I dare say he goes with goodwill." There was a sudden gust of wind in their sails. The ship lurched forward as a rolling fog overtook the dwarven fleet. "Dim sends his blessings," Avium said, now standing next to them. "He veils our path and speeds our ship along." "It is what we will do when we meet the other ships that worries me," said Rother. "We are but one ship." "Not exactly," Varin said. He went to the standing orb on the ship. "The ancestors. They can help us. They must help us." Part 6. Realms. It had been a few hours. Varin had taken the helm for the past hour, and as they moved ahead of the dwarven fleet, safe from their view with the veil of the fog around them, Rother studied the writings of the shipwrights to determine the way for the ship to do as its name indicated, to breach the actual realms and go unto another. "This place we go to," Vadis said. "This realm of Erlas. What is it?"
"A protected realm," Avium said. "In this case, by the text back at the Temple of Swea, Erlas was a realm of elves who fought in the wars long ago. Some of them were known as Blades, the most deadliest swordsmen of all the elves of old. They, in legend, were awarded a self-realm from the rest of the world. It is said the Dwemer destroyed their homeland long ago, back before the glacial seas. Their land is a hint of the world before, and though they can leave their land, it is safe, ordained, protected by the ascended Dwemer."
"Except when they created ships that could pierce such a realm," Evan said. "Why create such a device? When they could not master the science to ascend to the realms of gods, they tried to force their way. Many attempted, but eventually it was abandoned. Rather than scrap the technology, they repurposed the ships to guard their holy places. In time, all of that was for naught, but now there is a reason."
"All of this prophecy of the North and darkness, it is bleak," Varen said. "I just hope I can do something." "Stormborn, you can and you will," Avium said. "I will help you."
Varen flipped the crystal to bring up the map. They were south of Corson. The fogs were between them and the city, and the wind shifted in the sails. He turned north, allowing the wind to once again fill the sails. The fogs were vanishing, and the might of the dwarven battle fleet was laid bare to them. The massive armada was anchored, and the realm ship of the Barb King was moving further west.
"Valorin, I think I know the positioning for the crystals to enter the realm, but I don't know where it is, and I'm not sure if I did, I could actually get the ship to do it."
"If this ship has any more speed, give it,"
Vedis suggested. He strung his bow and went to the deck of the ship. He set an arrow to the string and released it. The arrow flew forward, propelled further by the favorable winds, but it was still out of range of the other realm ship. Rordo stood near Varen and closed the book.
"This is it," he said. "If we can stop them now, we will have no need for moving into the realms."
"Wards! Get wards up now!"
shouted Evan. Varen turned his glance right, as several arcing bolts fired from the dwarven fleet sped toward them. Evan, Bray, and Avium were on the side of the ship casting layers of protective magic, just in time to deflect several off of them.
"Damn! They're firing again!"
Vadis said. Another volley struck, but most fell short.
"They do not expect the need to follow their master. They pull anchor and attempt to close the distance. The same wind favouring us will favour them,"
Rotho said. They were gaining on the other vessel as the dwarven fleet pursued them. Vadis squinted and pointed.
"They have massive barrels on that ship."
"Barrels? It is the poison. They do not need this armada to destroy the elves. They just need the poison."
"Well, the armada is closing on us," Bray shouted.
Another volley of bolts struck their wards, and one broke through, smashing into the side of the ship.
"We're taking on water,"
Rordo shouted. Varen looked for the shipwright's assistants, the turtles that had repaired the ship before. Immediately they appeared, rolling into position near the breach. They went to work with their crystals, spinning, fusing the woods and patching the ship.
"When did we get those?" Rordo asked. "They are amazing."
"Back when I went adventuring alone, but they worked well to patch the ship before anyone noticed back at Evans Island."
"I knew the ship had to be damaged,"
Rordo said. The assistants rolled back into their balls and went back to the rear of the ship. Evan now stood on the far back of the vessel. His ward was large, but it seemed unstable compared to Avium's. The night was falling quickly, and it seemed that the Barb King's vessel was beginning to circle.
"What are they doing?"
Vadis asked.
"Maybe they cannot open the way? Perhaps they don't know how?"
Bray asked.
"That is likely, considering we barely know how."
The ship seemed to slow and then stop. Varen was gaining rapidly on them now. It was then the sails of the ship he was pursuing began to glow.
"Incoming fire!"
Varen shouted. A blast of red flame shot toward them in a spinning wall of fire, striking the ship. Bray, Avium, and Evan returned fire with their own spells, and a series of purple orbs screamed over them.
"Bane shots," Evan said. "If it strikes you, it saps your magic."
Varen turned the ship a hard left, angling for his own attack. He twisted the crystals and released a series of white blasts that screamed across the water, covering the opposing ship. He could see many of the dwarves on the other ship were now convulsing. Avium jumped toward the left side of the ship and cast another ward up as several flaming bolts flew toward them.
"They are cornering us, Varen," Rother shouted. "Now, summon the ancestors!"
Varen gave the wheel over to Rother and went to the orb on the deck. He placed his hands on it. "Speaker of Arik, hear my call. Come to my aid this dark night upon the glacial seas. Come with the fury of the fleet to support the realm ship of the Sea Peoples and the Dwemhar." A blue bolt of lightning shot out in all directions, and the winds died completely. A storm rolled in out of a clear night sky from all directions. The sea began to toss and churn wildly. A horn called out unlike any aboard the ship had ever heard. From the orb itself came several sparks that shot up like a wall over the deck of the ship, in a line going north and south. There was another horn sound, this one like it was on top of the other. From the wall of sparks came the ships of Arik, and the dwarven fleet fired their fiery bolts in the largest volley yet. A blast of white energy shot from the massive fleet of Arik, and while multiple ships of their own burst into flames from the dwarven attack, the dwarves suffered as well. Rother turned them back towards the Bob King's vessel.
"He tries to flee."
The ship was heading back west, and there was a sudden bright flash in front of the ship. A spinning vortex of white and black appeared, and the ship entered it, and vanished.
"They have pierced the realms," Evan yelled. "Varen now! We must follow them immediately!"
Rother bent down to the crystals and glanced back at his book.
"Okay, it's done. Now just do it."
"Do what?" Varen said.
"Grab the wheel,"
Bray suggested. Varen did so, but nothing happened. He gripped one of the crystals and twisted it slightly. Nothing. He could feel the power growing in the ship. His heart began to pound, and he felt like he couldn't catch his breath. Suddenly, his eye caught sight of the center mast where his amulet was placed. He could see it shining a golden hue. He ran to the mast and placed his hand on it, closing his eyes. There was a flash, and he opened his eyes as the portal just as before he had seen the other ship pass into swallowed the ship. There was a moment of breathlessness, of absolute stillness. Varen glanced around at blackness and starlight surrounding them. A second later, bright sunlight and the sudden splash of the ship striking the water blinded his eyes. He shook his head to clear his vision, and he saw a massive forest and a green hue in the air. They were in a bay of some kind, with a large river ahead of them. There was a massive tree in the distance, and several structures crumbled around them. The dead were everywhere. Elves crawled over each other along the shoreline, coughing and gasping as they began to seize and fall to the ground. There was something else. A dwarf with a staff pulled the dead back to life.
"Irikal!"
Evan shouted. They entered the river passage, and Evan jumped from the ship and onto the shoreline. He sprinted toward the Lich, who sent a blast of necromantic magic his way. Bray disembarked to follow, seeing a large contingent of dwarves swarming the woods and coming behind Evan. They disappeared from immediate view, but Varen spotted several blasts of magic and explosions of wood and rock. It was then several massive trees fell, blocking the river path. Thaddeus looked up, his bowstring at cheek as he fired an arrow and then drew his sword. Elves boarded the ship. They were faster than Varen had ever seen. 3 of them were upon Thaddeus and quickly knocked him from the ship. Rother moved forward and engaged one of them, as Avium sent a blast of magic at another, sending them flying off the ship. A moment later, a blast of magic flew her way from a figure on the coast. It was a female, and she was headed towards them with a glowing staff. Thaddeus was now on the ground with 2 elves chasing him. He parried and ducked behind trees, but the 2 attacking him
were relentless. Varin knew the ship was of no use, and Rordo still engaged the elf on the ship. Varin drew his blade and jumped onto the shore to help Phaedus. One of the elves had its back turned. He spun his blade in a taunting fashion, and Varin ran for him, lifting his sword to strike. No more than a snap of a twig caused the elf to catch wind of him, but that was all that was needed for Varin to be knocked off his feet and flying backward. Varin looked up to see Rordo was forced down on the ship. Phaedus ran to strike the elf now coming for Varin. The elf turned, parrying the ranger's sword and drawing a second blade in an arcing slash, forcing Phaedus back. It seemed the elf who had faced Rordo was not finishing him off, but instead stood on the railings of the ship, his blade held behind him as he stared toward Varin. The dual blade-wielding elf came at him again. Varin tried to parry, but the quick slashes of his opponent knocked his sword from his hand. He fell back again and saw the elf mid-air above him. The blades were like the fangs of a spider coming at his head for the final strike, when a staunch voice shouted out, "No! Stop!" The elf drove its blades into the ground at either side of Varin's head. Varin stared up at what would have been his killer. The curved ears and slightly long hair, the face veiled behind a cloth meant to block out the poison. He then looked at the two swords and the slight red glow to the blades. The elf stood up, ripping his swords from the ground and sheathing them. Phaedus too had been spared at that moment, but he kept his sword up. The other elf they were fighting now sheathed its blade and walked over to Varin. The voice that had called him to stop was the elf who had faced Rordo. He jumped to the shore, and behind him came a female, garbed from head to toe, holding a staff of flame with magic. Avium walked with her. "You!" the obviously older elf said, pointing at him. Varin tried to catch his breath but could not. The poison from the area had dissipated, and the approaching elf removed his own face covering. "I know you," Varin said. "You are the boy of eels from Trava," the elf said. Yes, I am. You were the swordsman, the one with the boys my age, or so you said." "I am. Tell me quickly, why do you attack us here? How have you come to this realm?" "We do not attack you," Varin said. "I followed the Barb King, a dwarf. He intends to destroy this realm with poison. He travelled up the river, but to where, I don't know. The capital city is there, and from what I've seen of the poison already, its results are absolute. I am Jarlin, and this is my wife, Archon of Erlas, Iluri." He helped Varin to his feet. About that time, Evan and Bray returned. Avium approached from the ship. "Iroquois has escaped," Bray said. "They go toward a massive tree in the center of the lake. There are elven vessels slowing its approach, but they are burning as quickly as they come. We must get to that ship with our own and stop them." "I agree," Jarlin said. "My wife and I can assist you." As they walked back toward the realm ship, Jarlin stopped and embraced the other two elves. "Go back to our home. Protect them. If we fail, you know how to get out," he said to the first one. The other elf drew his blade. "Father, I cannot just wait while you and Mother go to fight. Let us help you. We bested these people easily enough. Let us help you. Master Rooks and the other blades will help us. You protect your brother and sister. They are too young to be left alone if the dwarves come back." "Father, they hate us. We will show the purebloods that we—" "Keelan, you do not need to show anyone anything. Remember, if times become dark, your most important allies are those you love and your blades. Go. Both you and Taslan, watch over Kalik and Allery. Your mother and I can handle this." The elf known as Keelan did not seem too happy by his father's words, but he and the other one made the quick journey back across the river and disappeared into the forest. As Jarlin and Iluri boarded the ship with the others, Varin went to the helm and used the ship's powers to burn away the trees blocking their path. The elves were surprised by the power of the ship. "Amazing," Jarlin said. "This is the last bit of our toils. We must pray the gods are with us. I do fear we are getting far from their grace here." The ship lurched forward. Varin guided it upriver, where more elves lay dead along the shore. As they broke into open water upon the lake,
They followed the trail of broken and burning vessels. The Barb King was ahead, and had reached an inlet of sorts. Even from afar they could see the flashes of elven swords as the blades of Erlas, the swordsman of the elves, fought the dwarves for control of the shore. It seemed Iroquois floated above the water a good distance away. He held his staff below him, and he neared the edge of the shoreline. He brought an army of undead elves to battle, striking the flank of the larger elven forces. Varin could see that there were few dwarves on the actual realm ship, but that most of the poison had been rolled onto the shore. The Barb King had formed a shield wall to protect the poison being left on the shore, and the undead army was meant to cover their retreat from the realm. Avium closed her eyes and touched Varin. "Destroy the Barb King, and do not wait for me." There was a flash of light, and then an explosion of dust amongst the undead army. "Where did she go?" shouted Bray. Flashes of white and undead flew in all directions as the daughter of Lorlam drew all those attacking the elves on herself. She was in the middle of the undead. Blasts of fire, ice, and bolts of raw energy decimated the lines of Iroquois summonings, but there were still hundreds swarming around her. Varin could see Adanos and the Barb King's ship, his hands still smashed into the center mast, and with no signs of life. Varin brought his ship alongside the other realm ship as the Barb King returned to his vessel.
"Foolish boy, I am Stormborn. You will not live another day. You will all die."
The massive dwarf ran forward, jumping onto Varin's ship. Jarlin and Alluri engaged him, and Bray let out a burst of icy magic, attempting to slow him. The dwarf barreled through the spells and knocked the elven blade Jarlin away. Rother rushed forward and locked axes with the Barb King.
"You fight on the wrong side, dwarf,"
the Barb King laughed.
"I am the god of all. I am Stormborn."
Vadis pulled back an arrow, sending it into the Barb King's back.
"Fuck you!"
The enraged dwarf swung his axe around, striking the railings and shattering the wood. The arrow distracted him for a moment as he grabbed at it and broke off the bloody shaft. Vadis rolled backward and drew his blade. In a sprint forward, he joined the others in a combined assault, striking the dwarf.
"Iroquois!"
he shouted out. The Lich had been attempting to attack Avium, to no avail. He returned to the entwined ships, but Evern was on him. The Shadow Elf jumped at his foe, swinging his staff with a blast of green that entwined the Lich.
"Gorasi!"
The snake shot out from his robes and bit the dwarf over and over. Iroquois fell and convulsed as his skin, at least what remained in this almost already dead form, bubbled with poison. Evern shoved his staff into the Lich's mouth, and with a twist, blasted the head off Iroquois, finishing the Lich completely.
"You will not touch the holy sanctum of Varika again, you beast!"
The Barb King let out a shrill yell and jumped to his ship. The others followed, just for him to make a swiping swing, sending all of them flying back. Evern jumped at him and landed a smite of his staff on the dwarf's back, just to be grabbed and thrown across the ships.
"The undead will continue to feed on the poison, and any still within these woods will be devoured in time. I must only finish this now."
Varin knew when the dwarf turned to run toward the helm what he was going to do. The controls to blast the poison were there. He was going to use the ship. Varin drew his blade. "Barb King," he shouted, standing on the railings. "I am the Stormborn, protector of the oceans and realm of Mirdas. I will destroy you." Varin jumped at the other ship, slashing his blade at his opponent, who did not expect the sudden attack, taking the entire edge of Varin's sword across his face. Blood poured from the slash, and he grabbed his mouth as he fumbled with the crystals, still trying to ignite the poison. Rother jumped aboard the ship, and then the Barb King managed to pull one of the crystals, but not the correct one. A golden orb of light surrounded the ship. Those aboard Varin's ship attempted to enter it, but they could not get into the protective shield. Rother gripped his axe and moved along the middle deck. Varin held out his blade as the Barb King walked down toward Rother.
"No more games, and no more help from your friends."
Varin jumped from the helm down to the lower deck and slashed again, but this time the dwarf parried and punched him in the face, throwing him across the deck. He looked up to see the form of the dwarf nearly upon him, when Rother swung
just missing Varin and striking the Barb King center chest. Blood and tissue sprayed onto Varin's face, and the Barb King yelled and gripped the wound, falling to his knees.
For the Hammer Songs and all dwarves of honor,
Rotho shouted. But as Rotho went for the finishing blow on the Barb King, Varin noticed a slight smile on the old dwarf's face. The many barbs that lined his armor suddenly grew in length, piercing Rotho in his chest and neck. Bright red blood began to seep from the wounds, and Rotho fell backward and collapsed. Varin pushed himself up and reached for the nearest weapon he could find, Rotho's axe. It was heavy, but he tried to lift it up. On the outside of the ship's shield, Bray, Evan, and Iluri attempted to blast their way into the shield, but Varin didn't expect them to be able to reach him. He thought of running back, dropping the axe and making his way to the crystal to disable it. Perhaps he could do it and get their assistance.
Come now, Stormborn. If you are truly that, you can defeat the God King of the Glacial Seas.
Varin lifted the axe up. It was getting heavier at every passing moment, but he had to strike. He ran forward, lifting the axe above his head and swinging for the Barb King, only to have the axe caught by his opponent mid-air. He let go and grabbed for his sword, rolling back against where Adanos was. He looked at Adanos, the one who had found him on the island of Trava, the one who had taught him about sailing in the stars. Adanos was still alive, but he looked closer to death than ever before. The Barb King laughed and grabbed hold of Varin's head, ignoring Varin's attempts to cut into his hands. Varin dropped his swords and began to scream as he was lifted higher into the sky.
Stormborn, you have failed!
Varin gripped the dwarf's hands, trying to pry them off him, and suddenly there was a splash of blood that shot up into his view. Varin was falling and rolled to the ground. He looked up to see Adanos had brandished his sword and thrust it into the neck of the Barb King. The proud dwarf collapsed as blood bubbled out of the wound. With a few last convulsions, the Barb King was dead. Varin coughed, still trying to breathe, and crawled to Adanos.
Vals, you did it. You stopped him,
Adanos whispered. No, you did. You killed the Barb King. Adanos smiled.
I did. I also got my ship, as much as it was ever meant for me to feel. Rotho would say my ship needs a name. Ayla, for an elf I saw once. She was beautiful.
He smiled.
But it is too late for that now.
He gripped Varin with his one arm.
It is time for me to die, as I should have before. Goodbye, my friend.
Adanos' head fell to the side, and the golden shield protecting the ship dissipated. Adanos! Varin shouted. Bray was the first to reach Varin, gripping him from behind. We have to go! Now! She paused for a moment, staring at Adanos. She realized he had died. Tears welled in her own eyes, and she struggled to breathe.
Quickly, to the vessel,
Evan said.
Now!
Thaddeus was at Rotho's side. He's still alive. We need to get him off this ship. Varin looked up. The undead were swarming the shoreline, and the poison was now a massive green cloud surrounded by a shimmer of white. Avium was high in the sky and glowing like the sun above her. What is going on? Varin asked.
When you were trapped on the ship, one of the dwarves managed to release the poison. Avium has shielded it, but we must open the path to our realm and remove it from this one. We can release it in our realm to drift off within the seas, but if it remains here, we have failed, for it will simply spread through the trees and destroy all life.
Varin grabbed his sword and touched Adanos' head one last time. Be at peace. Jumping back to his ship, he looked to the two elves who had come with them. Thank you, Valorin, Jarlin said to him. Surely the gods are with you, and with all of us this day. The two of them jumped to the other realm ship and joined the other elves as they killed the remaining undead. Evan held Irakao's staff with his own and smiled at Varin.
A souvenir and something to remember that fool by.
Varen turned the ship, and then did his best to remember the exact positioning Rother had used before. He closed his eyes, feeling the positioning until he could feel the ship itself around him, his heart thudding at an even pace. He opened his eyes and ran to the center mast. It was then Avium floated down and grasped the mast of the ship, still holding the horrid poisons of the dwarves within her protective spell. In a flash, the portal opened, and they were in darkness. But it was different this time. Those around Varen had stopped moving. They were no longer flowing through the void between the realms, but instead, the others on the ship faded away. A figure appeared in a hazy vision before him.
"This is my lands,"
the figure said. "What?" This are my lands. These are my lands, the Erlas woodlands." "Your speech," said Varen. "It is strange. When I am attempting to talk without a clear focus of my powers, that can happen. I feel I am okay now. It is easier between realms than it is within my own." "Who are you?" The figure smiled. "I am whatever is believed by those of Erlas to be true. Many know me as a shaman, but I am much more powerful than that. My name is Ayuir. I guard the future as you defend it here today. The dark happenings will not be known by those who witnessed them within the realm. Those who have died cannot be brought back, for I do not have the power to defeat death. The one who does has spared these events. The one of death. The one called Vanku, the bringer of future darkness. He wished to use this Barb King in another way, but his methods of manipulation are poor. The prophecy of the glacial seas and the one who will release the darkness will come to pass in time, but of how this will come about is still unclear. I will heal the trees, restore the rivers, and return the broken ruins and ships to their original elements. The river will hide the bodies of the dead, and it will be believed by those who remain in Erlas that a sudden sickness came upon them. None shall know of you, and none must ever know that you are here. Know that I take great risk in doing this, but such it must be for future events to come to pass." "I do not understand," Varen said as he walked toward the figure. "You will await the arrival of those of Erlas. It is not yet time. The will of the great poet has not come to pass, but soon, very soon in their lives, they will be sent upon the oceans to Corson. You have many years before this, but once your amulet shines brightly and falls from the wood, it is in this moment you will know it is time. Your crew will know of these terms, for I speak to them as I speak to you, save one who is aboard the ship, for he is too far away from the living realm. Go now, Stormborn." There was a flash of light, and Varen looked up to see a starry sky with the polar light shining in a ribbon of red above them. Avium shouted, and as the poison was pulled fully into the realm of the living, she released it upward. A sharp wind blew upon them, and the poison was blown away, having never killed the thousands it was meant to kill. Avium fell to the deck, completely weak. Evan went to her as Phadis stroked Rother's chest. "He isn't breathing," Phadis told them. Varen went back to the helm and fought back tears as he turned the ship back east. There were no signs of the Dwarven fleet, and the fleet of Arak had vanished. Varen wasn't sure if they could be summoned again, but for the moment, he didn't care. He would sail to Corson. Rother's cousin should know of his death, and Varen sought to be free of the ocean for a while. It felt like a few moments, but they sailed into the port of Corson with a Dwarven vessel just behind them. Phadis was alarmed at first, but then he lowered his bow. "That is the same ship the Hammersongs at Sweer had," he told them. They pulled into the port of Corson and docked with a Hammersong vessel. Nurakas and the others with him knelt as Phadis and Evan carried Rother from their ship to the dock. In a procession, they went toward the spitting crabfish. An emotional Eurus rushed everyone out of the inn. There was silence as they simply stared at the body of Rotho they had laid on the actual bar of the inn.
It is the closest to Harada and a homeland that he can get, Eurus said. He died defeating the Bab King in combat.
He landed one of the last strikes, Varin said, and he saved my life. Eurus choked back tears and laughed.
Good. He would have wanted to die like that.
He began to cry, and Nurkas knelt before him.
Your cousin has served us with a great sacrifice, and I would like to return him to Harada to receive a proper dwarven memorial in his honour. I came to these seas to seek out the truth, and of the many dwarves I met, this was one of the last, who I could feel the vigour of our dwarf god Thraka within.
Eurus nodded quickly.
I am honoured by this, and he would have loved to be thought of as such. Then we will make preparations for the journey, and leave immediately.
In the coming night, Varin lay down and went to sleep. When he awoke from his slumber, he ran downstairs to the inn to find only his crew awaiting him.
4 days, Captain?
Ray said.
What? You slept for a long time, Evan said. I guess it is well deserved.
Where are the others?
The dwarves departed. They took Rotho for his last rites in the lands to the south.
Varin walked up to the table the others were seated around and grabbed a piece of bread from the centre.
He told us to lock the inn when we leave, Ray said. I figured you might want to stay a bit longer after so much time on the sea.
Varin ate the bread and then sighed. He went to the door and opened it. The others followed him. Standing on the shoreline, looking past his ship at dock and to a rising sun, he took a deep breath.
I think it has been by far enough time we've been on this rock. Let us get back to sea. We're ready, Captain, Bray said, embracing him.
Thaddeus walked past him to follow Bray, and Avian went as well. Evan was the last to go past him.
He turned and looked at the inn, and remembered the soothsayer's words. In his heart, he felt it would be many years before he was needed again here.
But there were still many upon the sea who would need him. He smiled and went to the ship.
As they began away from the city, the winds pushed them south, and as the sun rose a bit higher, he thought of Adanos.
I think I figured out a name for the ship.
They turned to look at him. He smiled.
The Ayla Sunrise.
Ayla Sunrise? That's a strange name, Ray said.
Named after an elf Adanos once saw, and said was beautiful.
One of the last words he spoke to me was that he wished he could have named his ship after her. I'll do it for him. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be standing here with each of you. It is the least I can do in his honour.
The Ayla Sunrise, Evan said. It could be worse.
As Varin smiled again, thinking of the name of his ship, Thaddeus joined him at the helm.
I think it is time we go south.
South?
Yes. I have a son who needs his father. I think I have long paid for my folly. If we can, I would like to try and find him.
Varin nodded and brought up the map. The ship of the glacial seas was headed south, at least for now. The Stormborn would be called upon again, and in that time, Varin would surely answer.
This has been Elfbane, A Tale of the Dwemhar, Stormborn Saga Book 3, written by J.T. Williams, narrated by Nick Denton, copyright 2017 by J.T. Williams, production copyright by J.T. Williams.